Hello, welcome. I will kind of sort of call this meeting to order as I won't be chairing it for very long, hopefully. But I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Jeff, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mayor.
It's even on the agenda.
That is very frustrating, excuse me. Okay, Committee Member Lee.
Here.
Committee Member Pietzel.
Here.
Committee Member Malone.
Here.
Committee Member Becker.
Present.
Committee Member Myram.
Present.
Committee Member Huber. Don't see him yet, Mayor.
Okay.
And then we have Committee Member Mayton.
Present.
Committee Member Smallwood.
I want to see how many times you're going to say committee member. It's a mouthful. Here.
Committee Member Sheldon.
Here.
Committee Member Walker.
Present.
Committee Member Exner.
Now he's thinking about it.
Here.
Committee Member Hopkinson.
We're everywhere.
And Committee Member Pulliam.
Here, thank you for that. Very good job, Jeff. Welcome everybody to our first budget committee meeting for the, what is this, for 24-25 biennium. Thank you everybody for your service on our budget committees. I look around, a lot of familiar faces, not the first time or only time I think anyone has served our community of Sandy in some capacity or another. So thank you everybody for your continued service. The first matter of business before we approve our minutes from our last meeting all the way back in 2021, which feels like a completely different time than today. We need to elect a chair and vice chair. I think Pastor Mayor Malone did just a fantastic job for us 2 years ago. Certainly willing to go forward with a repeat performance of that. But if there's any, is there any nominations for chair of the budget committee?
I renominate Linda.
It's
She's
easy.
going to do a good job.
I agree. Is there a second for that?
I'll second it.
Okay, there's a motion from committee member Walker, and a second from committee member Sheldon, that we ruin the next couple of weeks of committee member Malone's life. Do you accept the nomination of chair?
Sure.
All right, with that, you know how to do this. Do you want to take us through the nomination and of our vice chair, chair?
Sure.
Point of clarification, should we vote?
Oh, yeah.
Have we not voted?
No, we skipped that part.
Maybe we should
We're having
vote.
a short-term memory.
All those in favor of Linda Malone being the chair of the budget committee as motioned by Kathleen Walker, seconded by Richard Sheldon. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right, Chair Malone.
See, the other one was done in Zoom,
Yes, it was.
so I could say things off.
Yeah, we can hear you mumble now.
You know, you had to be able to read lips.
That's right.
Last time. All right. I'll entertain any nominations for vice chair. Jan. I'll nominate Jeremy.
I'll second it. I had a feeling that's coming.
If he wants.
I will do that. Just to let you know, I'll probably be on Zoom on the third meeting, just to let you know that. I know you'll be here anyway, so.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Barring an emergency, I will be here. So, is that all the nominations we have? Okay, we'll take a vote. All those in favor of Jeremy serving as vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Congratulations.
thanks, it's the best seat in the house.
Yeah, you always find a way into that seat.
You don't have to do anything.
Chair Malone, just to let you know, we do have Committee Member Huber has joined us. now, too.
Okay, great. And hello. And now we have the minutes, so the draft minutes from May 10th. Need a motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Moved by Mayor Pulliam and seconded by Exner, by Carl. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Okay,
Chair,
Minutes.
I'll abstain.
you'll abstain. Okay. Note in the record.
So
Thank you. New business.
Well, thank you, Chair.
I'll turn it over to you.
Members of the Budget Committee. It's always actually kind of fun to say that half jokingly, but it is kind of fun for the city manager to give the budget message. It's kind of the one opportunity I get to share sort of the outlook for the city. The budget is arguably one of the most important, if not the most important document for the city government. You have the comprehensive plan, but you also have these annual financial plans, in our case, biannual financial plans that really outline where your government is going to be spending their resources and putting public dollars to use to provide the services our community expects and implement council goals and our vision. It's a policy document just inherently because it shows where we have our priorities and where we fund them. And then it's a form of control for you all to get public input and then make sure that we stay within our means to the appropriations that you set. So we go through a process of working with staff to develop our budgets. It's mostly Tyler working behind the scenes then to assemble this document. And I'm sure everybody's read all 115 pages or so. But no, I'll try to focus on the highlights, kind of go through the main points in the budget message and the key themes throughout, highlight a few things on revenues and expenses and council goals. And then after the budget message presentation, we have the general fund departments that will give presentations tonight. So feel free to ask questions throughout. I think what I'll be speaking about is mostly captured in the budget message and in the summaries in the front of the budget. And then once the department heads start presenting the budgets on the general fund, I'm sure we'll welcome questions at any point during that time too. So without further ado, just a snapshot of where we're at today. We always like to include statistics in our budget, but we're about 13,000 people now. Had a big jump after the census, as what happens during fast growing cities tend to get lagged as we try to forecast population in those years between the census counts. Overall, we're seeing still a lot of growth, household income increasing. Average market values have increased, I think, $50,000 in the housing market since 2021. And then assessed values also growing at that 3% statutory minimum, which I'll talk about here in a minute with revenues. Overall, the budget is now $126 million, 126.6. So a pretty big increase. I think when I did my first budget here was in 2019, I think we're at 72 million. And if you back up, I think even further to 2013, we're at 50 million. Why? Water and wastewater has dominated a lot of that increase as we're investing in those systems. Huge projects that take a lot of investment, a lot of fund balance that we're carrying over, a lot of capital outlay now, and it's projected over $20 million in this biennium for those utilities. So that's the bulk of it, but a pretty substantial budget for a city of 13,000 people.
Jeff, can you fix that screen so it reflects the budget numbers? Possible?
Are we able to?
We do both screens.
Yeah. I'll work on that.
All right. Yeah, keep going, Jordan. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. So if we strip out fund balances and capital is where our operating budget is. So operations is the ongoing costs to run the city, basically mostly personnel, materials and services like contracts and materials. Debt service, ongoing debt service to pay for those big projects. So we include that in the operating budget because we expect to have debt service for 15, 20, 30 years as we pay off loans and bonds. And then transfers really kind of inflates the budget, but they're usually included in that operating budget. But also, for a city of Sandy size, growing, adding staff, seeing operating costs go up with high inflation and everything, we are seeing our operating budget increase. So diving into resources. So resources includes all our revenues, but also beginning fund balances. Here in the snapshot, one thing I do want to highlight is that fines, fees, assessments really is SDCs and utility revenues. And so that portion of the pie has really increased over the years, and especially in the last year or two. as we really start to increase the utility rates and SDCs to pay for the big infrastructure projects that I just referenced. And I will do a little deeper dive into that in a minute. So if we strip out the beginning fund balances, this is your revenues. Property taxes, 9.1 million is the biggest general fund revenue source. And then again, fines, fees, and assessments, I think is almost 20 million more now than what it was 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So this is basically reflecting doubling of wastewater and water revenue. Also stormwater revenue coming in, and also sandy net revenue all going into that category. So a pretty big increase there, which we expect as we increase rates for those utilities. So let's drill down on that a little, because this is, talk about big numbers, 126 million, water, wastewater. Well, here's where the kind of the rubber is meeting the road, so to speak. These rate increases that have gone into effect to pay for these massive and critical projects. The Sandy Clean Waters is our wastewater project you'll hear a reference. And then on the water side, our water reinvestment project, both mandated. We're under environmental regulations and need to improve and invest in our wastewater treatment plant and our water system. And so I kind of wanted to show just where we've been and where we're going in terms of rate increases, but also how much revenue is being generated for that, so we can cover the debt service, the capital that we need to invest. And I put stormwater in here too. It's kind of relates to a council goal to not forget about other utilities that the city has, like the street fund and the stormwater fund. Stormwater is a fund that is going to need additional investment. And so we started to tick up those rates. You can see compared to water and wastewater, 1.4 million for the biennium is small, but we're getting there to have a more functional utility that will have a master plan that we can start investing in more capital.
So just real quickly, unless you're going to do some of the future slide, what's the rationale for 1.4 million for stormwater? Is there, I know there's a master plan involved.
Yeah.
Is there some?
We had the Tupper Road and Strawbridge repair project, which was about $400,000, and we funded that through a contract that we had with Oxbow. Sorry to get into the weeds on this, but with our collection system work on the wastewater side, we piggybacked on that to do that improvement project. And so we're paying the wastewater fund back. The stormwater fund is paying the wastewater fund because we funded that through an SRF loan with wastewater, essentially. So there's that, but also we're building up a fund balance there that then go and do a master plan for stormwater, because the Tupper Road Strawbridge was an indicator that we're starting to see failures in our system, and we need to invest in pipe repairs and culverts and things like that.
But that's not a slight increase. I mean,
That's a pretty substantial.
it's pretty substantial.
These are all single years and that's double year, right?
That's so
Okay, yeah.
so 60% the first
still-
year, 25%. Yeah, I probably should have thrown in there what that translates to dollars. It's I think $8 and $10, or it goes from $5 to $8, and then $8 to $10.
These are off our approved fees or?
So because the budget gets presented before the master fees and charges, this is your first glance at what the proposed rate increases will be. Now, not to make this meeting into a fees and charges meeting, but as you can expect, as we do rate modeling and as we get better cost estimates for projects and stuff, we're constantly updating those numbers. So probably by June, these numbers might change, right, as we get better information, but these are what our rate models are showing
Not
today.
likely that they'll go down though.
Well, we could get more state funding, for example, which we're advocating for. So we have seen that. We've seen it go down before.
And staff, staff will be bringing back the master fees and charges to the council, the first meeting in June, and the work session, and then adoption, the second meeting in June. So
This isn't 1 year.
those first year numbers that you see on that slide are likely to probably remain flat, but it's the year two that as we find out if we get more state or federal funding, better rate models.
And we're not making light of the fact that that fee is only 10 because we add that with the others,
100%.
After a while, it turns
Yep.
into real money.
Oh, it is. So the average bill right now for a household that uses 7 CCF is about 120. And so 2024 or
We're two
implementing
old people. and
would be
ours is
150,
129.
looking at
Everybody
about
else has
150.
It adds up.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, drill down number 2. This one shows, I thought was a good sort of picture of what COVID did for one revenue in particular, which was gas taxes. And so this is our local gas tax at 2 cents. And so one of the interesting things here is we have rebounded. We collect about a little over 300,000 per year in gas tax. So that's essentially what we've budgeted. It's pretty stable there. So even with an additional gas station, some more pumps, it's probably the same amount of consumers just going to different stations or so. But I wouldn't be surprised to see this kind of flat anyways, with more electric vehicles, and something that we just want to keep in mind and kind of monitor over the years as we see more electric vehicles and charging stations and things like that are pretty much our only source of funding for street maintenance and pavement preservation comes from the local gas tax. So we budget about $600,000 for street maintenance. This comes from the gas tax. We know we need more than that to maintain a pavement condition of that optimal 80 PCI. And so something that we will just have to continue to pay attention to is how are we doing on gas taxes and how do we continue to put enough money into ongoing street maintenance. In the budget message and in the budget, you'll see that one of the proposals was is in the budget. It's transferring $600,000 from the general fund in ARPA money and general fund surplus to the street fund, really in response to council goal, but also to make that street fund continue to have enough money to invest in the street maintenance projects, but also recognizing that we're basically spending every resource out of the street fund to complete our highest priority project there in the current biennium, which will be done this summer, 362nd and Bell Street project. All right, drill down number 3, per the ordinance, the public safety fee that was passed in 2019, with the presentation of the budget, we do a review of the public safety fee. This is a fee that we are not proposing to increase, I'm happy to say. And this is, as you'll see later tonight, the police department budget's in pretty good shape for a variety of reasons. But this fee was implemented in 2019 to increase police and public safety services in Sandy. We have, at the time, I think we projected about $520,000 that was needed to pay for the positions that were sort of targeted for the public safety fee, another patrol officer, creating the lieutenant position and backfilling that position. That's now about $660,000 a year.
When we lost the esticated contract.
That's right. Yeah. So about $660,000 a year would be kind of the equivalent of what the fee was put into place, 4 years ago for. Biennium. No, yeah, biennium. So well, we are proposing in the budget to keep it steady.
May I just say these year to years, then all add up to a 2-year budget. It's not the best. It'd be nice if we either had everything at 2 years or everything at 1 year.
Apples and apples.
We could, I can make these tables collapse.
We're here now.
Yeah, so no increases proposed with the public safety fee. It's still $450 for and $1050 for commercial. But something to maybe just monitor in the future to keep our police department fully funded. Okay, general revenues, other general revenues. I mentioned property taxes. I'll dive into that a little bit more here in a minute. The state share revenues comes from the cigarette, liquor, state revenue sharing. So some growth in that with additional population. Franchise fees are increasing, really kind of reflecting price increases, but also just growth, more households paying for electricity and garbage and gas. Other than that, I think, franchise fees, it comes from PG, Northwest Natural, property taxes, 9.1. Where that goes, still the largest share is going to the police department. It's usually about half the general revenue. It's 53%. Over 6 million is still going to police. It's pretty common for cities that have police and fire, especially because it's a lot of personnel. 20 FTEs in the department, it's a service department done by public employees. And they also have needs for equipment and other things.
Is that common? My understanding is like at the county level, police services make up roughly 90% of their budget.
Well, they have jail and things like that too. It's not just deputies and stuff.
But I mean, so if we were, and we don't have to know the answer, but if we were to just compare our 53% to Malala or other communities that have their own police department, are we generally seeing 50% allocation towards police, more, less?
It's hard to do apples to apples because every city has different services. Some cities have park districts, so they don't have much, if anything, going towards those. I mean, we can, if you're interested, we can pull that, but it is kind of apples and oranges for every city because cities do different things with general revenue or just don't have the services.
We don't have sample cities like before when we've done things, we compare ourselves to Silverton or other similar size cities with similar infrastructure.
Yeah,
needs on that.
we just haven't compared like
Yeah.
how much property tax did they send to the police department for, we haven't done that in a
Yeah,
while.
it's just curious.
Can you go back one screen? You had two pieces of the pie there. I don't,
Oh.
by economic development, I don't see a name attached to a couple.
Sorry, I didn't get
Pie
to that there. It's planning and non-departmental. So the red is planning.
And the
at
green is-
7, yeah, and then green is non-departmental.
Okay.
Okay, so taking the pie chart out of it, here are the numbers. So you can see police, 6.7 million. So there is a few increases here to kind of talk about. With police, like I said, we have police budget's in the best shape it's been in 4 years. And a lot of that is due to some vacancies with officers, lags in actually getting vehicles. We put vehicles on order, and because of supply chain issues during COVID, everything, it took a long time to get them, or they're back ordered. But also the increase in the contract, the SRO contract revenue, and the public safety fee all kind of contributed to the police department being in a better position now. I think 4 years ago, they had a negative fund balance going into the 2019 biennium. So they only need an 8% increase this year, which was helpful for the rest of the general fund departments. Parks, buildings, and grounds, has a big jump. There was a reallocation of staffing as part of that. We had added, I think, an FTE last biennium. This is also an indication of those utility rates that you saw also impact city operations as we pay for water and sewer with the splash pad, for example. So, materials and services go up in our own, services, our own facilities to pay for that. And then we carried over sort of what the budget committee had done in the previous biennium, making sure we have enough money for maintenance in parks, buildings, and grounds, and also some capital. I think one of the projects is going to be more cameras in our parks for safety and things like that. On the planning side, that's also, you've noticed an increase there over the years, really reflecting one of the themes in this budget is, the impacts of a moratorium that we don't have a whole lot of certainty on how that will roll through, except for expecting that we have a freeze on applications. So, land use applications and revenue from that activity is definitely down 33% since 2019-21, I believe. So we have reduced a position in planning, but we also added a position with the code enforcement specialist. That was a council goal. And that is general revenue funded. We don't really know what the revenue recovery would be for a position like that quite yet. And there's some long range planning projects too that needed continuing general fund support, like finishing the comp plan, clear and objective audit, and the housing production strategy.
But it is almost double.
What's that about? Especially since you've cut positions.
So 228,000 is the the new code enforcement specialist.
$228,000.
for
the
2 years.
biennium.
Oh, by, thank
You
you.
know,
It's payroll.
maybe I'll just,
And
we
benefits.
just go to an annual
Yeah, I
budget.
get
you
it.
know,
Yeah,
so-
that's- I don't mean to get into the weeds and we can wait until that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. I just, it's, yeah.
All right, let's,
Comp plan in that?
yeah, the comp plan is about 80,000, so like 150,000 or so are just continuing planning projects like comp plan and housing production strategy, and the clear and objective.
Okay.
Okay, this is a better graph. This is showing the growth in assessed value and market values. The lines getting separated is a good sign. That gives us cushion to continue to take the 3% assessed value increases, but also, you know, back in 2010, I bet the lines were very close together, and even had some compression when growth was probably only about 2% for a few years there. We're 5.6% average AUV growth over the last 10 years or so, which is pretty healthy. So, you know, that's reflecting almost 3% of growth over and above just the statutory measure 50 growth. All good things that helps us maintain services, you know, keep up with costs. So here's that measure 50, a little more of that measure 50 graph that shows the 3% statutory. If your market value is above your assessed value can grow by 3%. And then the blue line shows, you know, the additional or the total growth over the years. So you notice that it's kind of a mountain range and we're starting to come down into a valley, and that's to that point of not knowing the full impacts of the moratorium and being conservative on the second year, especially at 3.5%, just anticipating that we may see growth slow by that second year of the biennium.
That's part of what adds to the urban renewal. Those kind of assessed values.
In the
In the
urban renewal
district,
district, yeah. So that would be like, a similar graph you would see is like
Yeah.
the frozen base and then
Yeah.
growth over the frozen base, but yeah.
You're showing there is the potential projection if the moratorium was to continue,
Well,
then we're not gonna be able to build as much, so we're not
Yeah.
projecting as much growth.
yeah, and there's some philosophical sort of budgeting that can happen here. We're pretty conservative. We have a lot of projects still in the pipeline that have been, you know, have a land use approval that can get built in the next couple of years, and that would probably hit in that second year. I think we're just trying to be as conservative as possible, not to overestimate that we could have impacts on, you know, smaller projects, but also, you know, projects that, you know, if there's an economy that's kind of questionable in terms of the housing market and things like that.
Don has a question.
Jordan, I'm a little confused. So when I'm looking at this graph, assessed value, is this saying that for the existing homes and businesses and properties throughout the community that we're projecting 3.5% goes up? Because it feels like we're mixing existing properties with future growth. Or is it, help me understand that.
This is just in the ag, so what's our total AV over a 1.1 billion? So when you get your tax bill, it's gonna,
Okay, so this is the roll, so it's everything.
it's
What we
everything.
have.
Yeah.
And then the increase, if you subdivide and now we have more.
Yeah,
properties, then that would show
new
you
homes,
these numbers.
construction, adding onto your house, things like that would add assessed value.
Did you have that?
Okay, thank you.
But is the reason it's going down is because the moratorium and we don't expect that much?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Carl has a,
Yeah, I'm just gonna be pain in your neck.
That's okay.
In any moratorium like this, where we just literally stop planning for these new developments, it's gonna take us a few years to ramp back up again. Is that also what's in this thing, or are you just assuming moratorium is gonna slow its way down? And what's our ramp back up again? Or was there what?
This is not showing the ramp back up because we're just looking at the next 2 years. But I would expect this to probably level out less, the 3.5% to 4%. And then, future biennium, maybe the second year of the biennium, you're starting to go back up.
So your logic is that the moratorium will last through 25.
No, this is, since we have a moratorium in effect right now, we're not accepting any new land use applications right now,
That's the logic.
right? That means we're not getting any new projects in the pipeline. So what we're doing is trying to project the projects that we have in the pipeline, that are getting built now. They'll be added to the city's tax rolls next year and the year after. But after that, so as it starts to drop in the 2025, 26, you're going to have this building lag. Like I said, this is pretty conservative. We still we have 200. We have a lot of units in the pipeline. So this might not be realized. It's better to come back with a surplus than overestimate what your revenue might be. And I think the difference with it's 0.5% is like $50,000 or something like that. So if it's like you want to tweak this, fine. It's not gonna be able to add you a body or anything like that. So.
How many current households do we have?
4,200.
4,200. And these current, buildings that you have in the pipeline are going to add how many?
Oh, I mean, it's the ADU mode versus or EDU mode. ERU, sorry. What is it?
Well, it's
700?
712.
712?
Plus another 6 or so other things. I don't know what you call them, 80, whatever the ERUs were, whatever, some other thing. There was a number of 6, but 712 was the name of it.
If we're just talking the next biennium, I thought it was 300.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
For the next.
like 280 to 300 in that range.
So 300.
Yeah.
And then also keep in mind, it takes about a year for property tax revenue to actually be realized on our end. So just because we build, let's say 300 in the next 2 years, we might only see the actual reflection of 120 of those during this biennium. And then the next, 150 or whatever kick in the 25, 27, but
And again, the current household was 4,200.
thereabouts, yeah.
And so here's your property tax revenue. Again, looking at fiscal years. So we're up to about 4.5 million per year and some change. So again, our biggest source of revenue for our general fund, and half of that goes to the police. Okay, let's switch over to requirements or expenses. Total requirements, pretty stable from year to year. We're definitely growing in the capital outlay line, stabilized, I guess I should say, to the last biennium, because we are maintaining a pretty high output for capital projects for water and wastewater. Contingencies have grown, obviously, in utility funds to build up that fund balance for future capital, but also to maintain debt coverage ratios that we need for future debt service that will be coming online in future bienniums. So overall, by fund, general fund is still the largest, but it's inflated because of the transfers and charges for services that we do to kind of reflect the full cost of services in the general fund. So really, our utility funds and water and wastewater are now our largest funds. If you kind of take out sort of the inflators of transfers, and that again is fund balances and capital for those utility projects. For personal services, our biggest operating cost, some big drivers as you expect during a high inflation period. COLAs projected at 6% and 4% at this point, really based this off of the CPI. CPI in January of 2023 was 6%. Starting to see that trend down finally, not down, but just not as high. I think it was 5.7 in February. So we'll see if that trend continues. In comparison, in January of 2021, it was 1.6. And then January 2022, it was 8.1. So kind of been on this roller coaster. So we'll get to be seeing what the second year in the biennium would be. But right now, projecting a 6% COLA. Then health insurance, I think some of this is the experience of coming through COVID, and then which we didn't really have a big health insurance impact actually during that time. This biennium, we do at 10%, 5% for each of our different providers. And so that comes with a cost. And then of course, PERS continues to hammer us each budget cycle. So another big driver for personnel. Not proposing to add too many FTEs in this budget, but I'll go into that in a second. Our FTEs per thousand are pretty consistent. This is where that census stuff comes into play with that graph. You can see our population curve really changes every 10 years. But we're at 83.7. The new positions, we did eliminate one planner position there, but added the code enforcement specialist with some rebalancing with library clerks. But then in the utilities with all these projects that need oversight, we have a program that we're kicking off with the collection system that needs additional supervision and work and manhole grouting and all that work. The projects that we're managing in water and wastewater, those are the positions that are proposed there. And then with telecom, we're bumping up a utility worker position to a full time.
So I know some of the logic for increasing FTEs, some were council goals. What was the direction to the different departments about how they wanted to increase their staffing? Is there, given that they anticipated, so some departments would put a lot in and some would not put much in? What was the logic for saying library clerks are going to have 0.32?
Yeah, so the library also has the library district, right? So it's a little bit less constrained, but still constrained. Yeah, general fund is pretty constrained. So the direction for general fund usually is that we're holding the line until we have a full picture of what the whole the general fund looks like. In this case, we knew that we had one body that the council was interested in adding. For utilities, this kind of goes into what our rate modeling and our projections are for those utilities as we're constructing these projects, but also growing the utilities and comparing what our needs are to maintain our streets and our, in this case, it's mostly water and wastewater that are funding these positions.
So my question was, I thought was, is it a level playing field for all departments? So everybody said, okay, I'm only supposed to increase enough to be able to cover the workload anticipated. It looks like I got a lot of money, so I'm going to put big numbers of FTEs in there. Or did you just say we're going to need associate planner, code enforcement?
I mean, it really has, because each fund has a different dedicated source, right? So like I said, in the general fund, we're more constrained just because, from just not less funding, right? To fund positions that, police, planning, parks and recreation, all are, come from property taxes. Versus utilities, we have rates, we have projects coming in that are funding those, and a little more flexibility to be able to add position in utilities. Not all utilities, like streets was constrained, stormwater was constrained, but as we kind of developed our rate models with water and wastewater, we kind of build in an operating portion of that, so it's just not all going to capital, but as we're adding our systems, we want to make sure that we're maintaining them and staying up with the collection system, CMOM work and all that. And same with Sandy Net. Sandy Net's constrained by rates, and kind of the tension between, do we increase it by another couple dollars and be able to add another body, to maintain customer service, respond to calls more timely and things like that, versus just kind of making do with what we have. Yeah.
Right. I get you.
So, with an associate planner coming off and a code enforcement specialist coming on, shouldn't it almost be flat?
No, I mean, this is kind of goes to the funding sources, like because of the planner position kind of reflects more of like what the planning activity is, and especially if we're projecting out that we have long range plans are kind of going to be completed in the next year or so, 6 more months of the comp plan and stuff. But if development activity is basically, really decreasing because of the moratorium, planners are, if you saw like 33% decrease in planning revenue is because of that, right? We're not getting subdivision applications right now. We don't have that kind of workload. I mean, Kelly's busy, he's got a lot of stuff to do, but projecting out the next 2 years, and then with the moratorium and everything itself, is that there's not going to be the revenue coming in to cover.
Right. But I just mean as far as expenses go, right? Because you're losing a full-time equivalent, but you're gaining a full-time equivalent.
And yet the salaries are going up like 100,000. So it's just, yeah. I mean, look at
Part of it's also the allocation of that FTE. So the associate planner, without getting too far in the weeds, was spread out. I'm not going to quote this precisely, but a little bit between the planning department, a little bit between building, a little bit between
Okay.
urban renewal, a little bit between economic development. So they're spread out among all these different things they do, right? The code enforcement specialist is going to be housed under the planning department and 100% funded out of planning under this current proposal. because they're-
100%. So not shared with law enforcement at all.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of just, behind the scenes payroll magic of how we allocate those salaries out, but that doesn't make this as clear as possible, but is you are able to see those changes, last few pages of the budget document where we have all the FTE allocated out and listed out.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully that code enforcement that's dedicated to the fire department will be able to respond to how come this isn't being enforced? We've got this problem, we basically have to tell people. I tell people, I don't know, but it's complaint driven.
Yeah.
So now we can actually respond to those complaints and maybe even be proactive.
And we're even gonna get away a little bit from complaint driven.
It'd be nice to actually go out and find the problems and fix them.
look
Yeah.
Yeah. Kathleen.
You're not
said
gonna
you don't
get
have to
away
look
from
very
complaint
hard.
driven. Complaints are gonna come no matter what, but to be able to respond to those complaints would be nice.
The school.
Jordan, it's a quick question for you. The associate planner that dropped in the plan department, I know the moratorium affected the amount of workload that they have, but what I'm hearing you say is that because the moratorium is gonna last into the next biennium, you're not needing that staff because you won't have the workload. But if the biennium runs through 25, if the moratorium drops off and building starts to come back again, which it's anticipated to do in the next year, won't in the second year, planning department be stretched thin, not having the staff to do the work like they were last year and things taking longer?
Maybe, yeah, I mean, we'll monitor it, and if development activity really picks up and we're slammed, yeah, we may be back saying we need another planner. We do have a planning director and we have a senior planner position too. And again, part of the workload challenges over the last couple of years and why we had 2 planner positions in addition to the planning director is that we had long range plans. So we had the comp plan, we had master plans, the TSP, the parks master plan, like we had a lot of long range plans that we were doing. And so as that work is completed, and we have our
Those
road
are
plans,
finishing up,
then
right?
we're more focused is on development review.
So if that happens, where are they gonna find their funding? In their contingency, or are we gonna have,
If we get more,
if all of a sudden it picks back up and they find themselves stretched thin, where are they gonna find their funding to get back on track?
well, I mean, additional development activity will generate a lot of additional revenue. So we'd probably stagger it. So, we're collecting a lot more in subdivision applications, all that. So we'll be able to demonstrate that we have enough revenue coming in.
They'll be nimble.
And just being my first budget, I just don't know all the ins and outs of it. So that's what I was trying to figure out. If you had the flexibility to make that happen. if you needed to.
Yeah. Okay, on capital side, again, a lot of funding there in water and wastewater, and this is continuing our major projects actually starting up in water, but a continuation of a lot of the investments in wastewater, which I say we've spent $20 million on the Sandy Clean Waters project thus far, and have had 0 capacity related violations in the last 5 months. So making progress.
That's a big 5 months.
All through winter. Yeah.
A rainy 5 months. Why do I see Deer Point? That's a subdivision.
Deer Point Park.
Okay, the park.
Yeah, sorry. at park there. But yeah, some other exciting things here. The street reflex Bell's 362nd project finishing up this summer. We also have a couple projects to work on, the Highway 211 in DeBarco, multimodal, the Highway 211 in Gunderson, Parks Capital at 5 million that we've budgeted. Some of those are kind of placeholders for council goals, like the land purchase. We're going to explore land banking for future active parks. We have the Deer Point Park project and also the community campus park that's designed.
Do you anticipate with the completion of the Bell Street 211 intersection, that road and the adjacent commercial property, is that something that you anticipate is going to happen within this biennium? That it would start to develop, or at least want to?
We just don't have enough certainty, but we would hope by in the next couple of years that we would be
Rumors are that it
working
will
with developers on that. In terms of the revenue, it's hard to predict at this point. What SDCs or fee and lieu, things like that.
I would hope it would pay for itself.
So I know the last time we did this, there was a lot of conversation about changes in the budget through the next biennium. There were times we needed to reinstitute the committee, and there were other times that the council could just make changes. Could you explain that so that the committee knows and refresh my mind?
Like if we need to do a supplemental budget, for example,
if we have some of these changes, there's some big question marks in some of this.
Yeah, anything over 10% in the fund, you need to do a public hearing essentially to get public input on that change. Otherwise, you could do resolution transfers and things like that. Where it might come into play is if the funding models or something like that changes for water, wastewater, where we get, bigger loans or things, where we'll need to convene the council to make a budget adjustment. But typically we haven't needed to do that. We haven't done it this biennium, I don't think at all.
Haven't done it full time on here.
Yeah.
Jeremy is the old guy, so I can tell you.
Well, Linda's the young whippersnapper, so she's been here longer. It's never happened when I was on.
I know we have a lot of presentation to go. I'm gonna keep going. This is a graph that we'll continue to show and talk about. Doesn't reflect the full picture. I can say that. This reflects what we have in place in terms of loans. We're projecting, wastewater to increase to over 1 million with our SRF loans and debt service there. And I think it's projected to go as high as 4 million by 2030 when you start thinking about WIFIA, SRF loans, and those borrowings for that project. Water has an equal sort of projection for increases for debt service. So graph to just kind of keep in mind, and really where it might affect us is as we think about other borrowings or things that we want to do, just being mindful of the amount of debt service that's needed for these projects in order to build them. On telecommunications, it'd be great to get that one, paid off. I know Greg would love that, but that's still projected out to 2035.
What's the general, especially in 2027? And also, can you just clarify the full faith and credit, which thing that applies to?
Yeah, full faith and credit is it's paid by the Urban Renewal Fund.
Okay, it's urban renewal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
the general.
The general is a library construction loan from the Clackamas County Bank. It has a balloon payment every 5 years. I think we would want to probably pay that off if we can in 2027 be done. So that's we fund that every 5 years.
Okay.
Especially with interest rates going up.
Okay. Huh. Thanks.
Interfund loans. Love to wipe these out someday. So these are loans that we pay amongst our funds for different projects over the years, just part of our annual debt service to ourselves. So you'll see that as an expense for the funds that pay the loans, and then as a revenue for the funds that loan them. In most cases, it was transit, I think, that made the loans. All right, a couple things to highlight here. I talked about inflation. This kind of is a factor in a lot of places in the budget. Still sitting at 6%, but possibly heading down. Construction cost index is another inflator that we monitor because it has a big effect on our budget for these construction projects or capital projects. It was 16%, I think, between April 2021 and April 2023. 16% growth in construction costs. So that's materials and labor and all that. So that continues to be a major driver for how we budget for these capital projects. How do we manage that? Large contingencies, adding even planning level contingencies when we do estimates. Jenny's pretty good at that, making sure that we set the bar pretty high so we can come in low. We try to. The infrastructure projects I've talked a lot about, the water and wastewater fund, I think we're around 16 million in 2019. Now they're 55 million, just, all that capital and fund balances that we're building up there. Still some uncertainty in the overall economy, but especially with the development activity. And so I talked about the moratorium impacts and how that kind of rolled through the planning department, but also as we project SDC revenue, for example, in the capital funds, those have an effect. In the budget message, I kind of went into some information about where you can find the council goals and how we funded those. We talked about code enforcement at $228,000, all the public infrastructure, especially with the in terms of the financial sustainability of the stormwater fund, but also the street fund, and then this other street projects that the council discussed with the multimodal project at DeBarco and Highway 211, especially. So funding a study for that and hopefully kicking off some sort of improvements there. Continue to try to responsibly manage growth, always an important thing for a rapidly growing city. We're excited to kind of be coming closer to the end for our comprehensive plan. We have those great vision statements. Kind of the roll up your sleeve type of work is happening now with the policies for each of the goal areas. At the same time, Kelly's working with consultants on the clear and objective code standards, which has been a council priority to tighten up our code. And that should be coming complete here this year. And then the housing production strategy is, one of those things that the state has mandated cities do as we calculate what our housing forecasts are and what our housing demands are. We're underway with the housing needs analysis, but also our economic opportunities analysis that are all helpful pieces for how we manage growth. Parks investments, I already touched on the 5 million budgeted for that. I know Rochelle and her team are excited to be actually doing projects after all the planning that we've been doing with the Parks Master Plan and other plans over the years. And then finally, I wanted to highlight that there is some funding for the Sandy Net Sustainable Utility Plan. Sandy Net's been so successful. We need to take a break, not a break, but take a breath and think about where we're headed, right? We have IGAs now with the county for expanding ISP services into more of the rural areas of Clackamas County, providing ISP services to businesses in Clackamas County. A lot of questions of, where do we go from here when we have 80% of the residential market in Sandy? It's been so successful, but how do we grow sustainably in that department to continue to provide that high level of service at such a great price? So I know Greg's excited to be doing that project. And then lastly, at the end of the budget message, if you remember 2 years ago, we talked about a surplus. And I, of course, can present something in the proposed budget and kind of allocate it where, I think as your city manager, where we should apply those dollars. But I thought like a couple of years ago, it's great to get your input. You have your eyes and ears and we're listening to constituents and members of the public. Through this process, we get public comment on where we should allocate dollars. And of course, we have ARPA. So, in most years, yeah, we're collecting more property taxes. We might have a little bit of a surplus from the prior biennium that rolls over. This year, we have close to $1 million. We have a lot of funds remaining from the American Rescue Plan Act. Fortunately, the final rules on ARPA funds allowed cities to claim up to $10 million in general revenue loss to provide government services to respond to the pandemic. So that gives you guys in the council the most flexibility in using those funds. And so we've basically said, yep, we'll take that as the 10 million allotment for general government. And, basically provide government services and respond to the impact of the pandemic using those funds. The council already committed the first tranche of funding that we received in 2022 to the covered structures and expanding standing net that's underway, including objective code audit. And then in this budget, I proposed the part of the remaining allocation to go to the general or go transfer to the street fund, $600,000 to make the street fund, basically whole again, provide the pavement management program and street maintenance. So we're still about $960,000. And I presented some ideas in the budget. One of my goals when I came to Sandy was, we need to beef up our reserves, get, kind of look at these interfund loans, things like that, just to make us more financially responsible and sustainable. But I'm sure you have ideas. There's other ones out there. We have a park project underway that has a phase 2, for example. There's always needs for street capital. Do have these ambitious projects in our TSB. Stormwater fund, for example, had that interfund loan to pay for those emergency repairs. Massive utility projects. So a lot of options for that. I'm sure ideas will come up as we present, as our department heads present the budgets, as you receive public comments, things like that. So not saying to do anything right now, but just keep that in mind that in the non-departmental budget in the general fund is where you'll find funding that's above our policy minimum that can be allocated.
Jordan, can you go back one slide?
Sure.
real quick?
That money's in the contingency on the budget right now.
Yeah.
There will be a supplemental budget in the next couple weeks from myself, delivered to you guys, the council, to actually allocate those funds out in this biennium to cover the expenses associated with those projects. So on the council side of things, you'll see me again talking about ARPA tranche 1, and then we'll talk about ARPA tranche 2.
We're good. Okay. Yeah, and so that's it. That's my my budget message to the budget committee. Welcome any general questions, any more general questions about the overall budget, but there'll be lots more to come. We have a lot of presentations to come with the general fund. So, yeah.
One question, I keep hearing contingency, and then I heard the word reserve. I've always known those as two separate items. Okay, but yet when I look through all of this, all I see is contingencies, but no reserve.
Yeah, so the easy answer is we basically budget our reserves as contingency. Legally, you can have unappropriated ending fund balance, which has a lot more restraints on it, and it's more for cash purposes, or if there's a very, very dire emergency. Contingencies are a little more flexible. There's still rules around them. You can't budget something to contingency if you do have a known expense, so you can't cheat that way. But I think it's just been past practice here, but also kind of a flexible policy to have a contingency. There's nothing wrong with having reserves for future expenditure lines and things like that.
That's what I was
Yeah.
kind of pointing at.
Yeah.
Why we didn't have that for future endeavors.
Yeah, and some of that's just labeling, right? We keep notes and in those contingencies, there's reserves for future expenditures, but we just don't break it out that way. Maybe a future document change that we can do just for more clarity. It's a good point. Yeah.
Trying to stay flexible, right?
Always. Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. Looking forward to going through the next couple meetings, and hopefully this will be a good process where you learn a lot, and I'm sure the department heads are happy to share their budget. So we're going to start with the general fund internal service departments. Chair, if that's so we kind of have an order here that developed. Kind of let Tyler go through administrative services, internal services, and then we'll get into more of the meat and potatoes of direct services like police and parks.
Right. Good evening, Budget Committee. Thank you for your time this evening. I know it's a large commitment to take out of your next several Thursdays, and we appreciate that. Jordan's already touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to just expand on our plan for tonight. We've already received the budget message. We're going to go through the general fund departments this evening, and then we'll have time for public comment. Next Thursday, we'll do all the other budgets, all the other utility funds and other funds that we have. If there is time, we'll touch on urban renewal next meeting as well, but more than likely that's going to get kicked to May 4th. Just from the sheer volume of projects and budget notes we want to discuss, as well as questions that we expect from the committee overall. I'm sure we will go into that third meeting. And then tonight, like we said, general fund, everything else below the top bullet point are all the other funds that we'll talk about next week. Unless you just have no questions of me or anyone else tonight and we can crank through it, we'll leave that up to you guys.
Sure. We're usually a group without.
Yeah. So we've got two sections of departments in the general fund. There's internal service departments that mostly provide services just to internal city departments. And then there's the direct service departments that provide services to the general fund. You're going to hear a lot from me for the next few minutes on all the internal service departments. And then I will turn it over to my counterparts, esteemed colleagues, as our old public works director would call us, and they'll go run through their direct service departments. First topic at hand is the mayor and council budget. This department specifically houses all the expenses associated with the council, which doesn't include any personnel expenses. The council is all volunteers. Most of the expenses here are materials related to running and managing the council, printing, utilities fees, conferences, organizational fees, memberships, and then there is a League of Oregon Cities conference that happens annually in non-COVID years, which the vast majority of the council has participated in. Transfers here are specifically related to the indirect services that support the council. So for example, part of the council budget pays into the finance department for accounting services related to you guys attending conferences and managing your expenses for the gym membership that the council is all entitled to. And so you pay into all the indirect service departments to have those lovely screens in front of you and have a laptop in front of you and all that. And then a very minor contingency of about 2% is also allocated here. Slide. About 2% contingency for the unexpected things that may arise within your guys' the council's budget.
What is the contractual services?
Contractual services is, I believe, is the monthly Zoom membership, so we can host the hybrid meetings. And there might be one other expense. Part of the indirect support cost goes into the legal. Yep. So actually, thank you for that, Sharon. Let me paint a little bit of a picture before we go any further. The indirect service departments that receive funding from all the direct service departments within the general fund and outside of the general fund are finance, administration, legal, human resources, IT, and then a small portion into non-departmental, which pays for overall city expenses that can't be attributed to a specific department. And so to your point, legal is paid for out of that indirect support costs, and then to committee member Lee's point, the contractual services is just the monthly cost of the Zoom membership. So we can ensure we are readily available and accessible to the public that can't make it to the chambers on a regular basis. Another COVID change, which I think has been good. Any other questions on this?
Yeah. No, go ahead. Somebody else was ahead.
Just On the page 24, the performance measures are those. Other than it's depressing.
So, two reasons. The selfish reason for me is because part of the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award that I submit this document for requires performance measures now. Didn't used to, now it does. The other part, which to your point is less exciting in this specific department, but in other departments is more exciting and paints a picture of the real demand for the services that the library or Parks and Recreation has on a year-to-year basis, or the amount of water that we're purchasing from Portland Water, for the number of customers that we have. So just to kind of paint a picture of the overall change over the last 5 or so years within each department or fund.
Okay, I just had a couple of questions on here. I see under line item 2,500 meetings and the meals, and you hit on that a little bit. We had in the 1921, we had $366 used. We budgeted this last biennium of $2,000, which just seemed a little bit high, going from 366 to 2,000. I would have figured it'd be about $800. And then from 2,000, we go to 4,500, which is 2x higher. And I would think that would be about $1,200.
Less zooming, more meeting in
Right,
person.
Exactly.
Right. So that's what I wanted to find out exactly what.
Several years ago, before the council was as busy as they are now, we only held work sessions maybe once a quarter. They were much more infrequent. Now a work session is part of nearly every meeting, so twice a month. And if the meeting starts at 6 o'clock for our work session, we tend to provide food for the council or any members of the members of the agenda that are there. If we have presenters or anyone else that's coming in, so we can make sure they're fed, since we're kind of requiring them to show a little bit early.
The same thing that Clackamas City's dinner went from 1,000 to 4,000 is because back in
We didn't host it.
2019, there weren't any because
Yep.
we didn't go to them, they weren't being had.
This is the first almost true post-COVID budget we're presenting, right? 1921 was half of that, was impacted by COVID. All of 21, 23 been impacted by COVID, and this is really sort of our unveiling of a post-COVID environment and
Yeah.
returning to a sense of normalcy, so to speak.
And travel and conferences too.
Well, conferences, yeah, we go from 2,700 to 18,000.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that means we're gonna send people to the National League of Cities. To the
Yeah, the conferences includes the U.S. Mayor's Conference that Mayor William has attended, as well as the League of Oregon Cities conferences, which we've seen more of an interest in, most, if not all, of the council members attending in recent years, whereas several years ago I think it was just 2 or 3 that went. So, and those have hefty price tags with hotels and meals and things that go along with being away from home for
It's a
several days.
good training sessions.
Good training, good networking, good getting face time in front of our peer cities as well as
Representatives. Goodness.
On not to go line by item, that's not the point. But I noticed that council work sessions went to 0. The same with mayor and council expenses went to 0. Is that moved somewhere
Or
else? in
those
the
are
budget?
lumped in with the mayor, with the meeting.
Okay, that's what I was figuring. I just want to make sure.
And you'll see that in a handful of departments throughout the budget presentation. We have a lot of specific general ledger line items. Some of them really cross over, and so I've tried to sort of move in a direction of consolidating
Condense and consolidate.
where it makes sense. So you'll see that in a couple different spots throughout this presentation.
And the last one I had was under the indirect support cost, which seems to have doubled.
Yeah, so part of the indirect support costs are allocated based on operating budget and FTE for other departments. And so the operating budget for the council, as you can see, has also sort of increased over the last several years. And we've made the assumption that there's not an actual FTE within the council, but we're making an assumption for calculation purposes of how to allocate costs to other departments, that there's one FTE equivalent among the 7 of you that we sort of have expenses related to. About that's true. We're not,
Somewhere
but
the
we
numbers-
gotta pick a number somewhere to figure out how to allocate expenses, so I picked one.
don't know how I feel.
You're volunteers.
Your ear and your eyes.
Well, half of it's.
That's a cheap FTE.
Yeah, I think,
Before.
I think that was a good point. And remember that part of this or half of it is legal. The more applications that come through and all the things that are going on in the city, you know, we pay legal and we want to have good legal and representation. We don't want to go cheap on legal.
And, you know, a good portion of our legal expenses are related to having a city attorney in this room for meetings that require it, right? So there is a cost associated with that. I'll talk closer to the microphone.
We have to share the budget.
Ah, got it. Any other questions on mayor and council?
Nope.
Seeing none. To go. All right, next up is administration. You could also refer to this as the city manager's office if you were looking for a more precise title. So this houses really all of these sort of administrative expenses associated with the city, a portion of nearly all of Jordan's salary, nearly all of Jeff's salary, and then a portion of my salary are paid for out of this specific department. We've got materials and services, which are not too exciting to discuss, pretty low. There's a little bit of, money allocated there for supplies and some conferences as well. But not a whole lot of excitement in the materials and services category. Contingency is again at about 2% of operating budget, just to have a little bit of, cushion there in the event of unanticipated expenditures that come up. I kind of skipped over the revenue, apologies there. There is two sources of revenue in this department other than the beginning balance, and that is a direct allocation from the general fund, which pays for about half of our city recorder's salary allocated, for the real administrative portion of that function. And then indirect service revenue comes from all of the direct service departments to pay for the administrative costs or administrative functions of the organization.
Yes.
Actually, the budget has gone up, but the contingency has gone down by about 2/3. Is there an explanation?
Yeah, one of the comments we received last biennium during the budget process was, is there a real need for the indirect service departments to have such large contingencies? Because their funding source is much more stable, given that I'm just going to transfer you general revenue from either the general fund or revenue from other departments. It's kind of a known quantity. We're not relying on development to get application fees in or water customers to pay on time or anything like that. So taking that feedback that we received last year, realizing that the revenue coming in is relatively stable, didn't feel the need to have as large of a contingency in these handful of indirect service departments. We have less volatility in the revenue stream.
I love the 2019-21 gas reimbursement. That was for like a gallon, $5.
That was, and someone probably drove to Gresham for a meeting. I don't know, $5.
So I don't see in here acknowledgement that we may end up having to recruit another city manager. Where's that at?
Yep, that's not reflected in this budget. Didn't know that was going to be an expense that we were potentially going to have as this was being created, over the last several months. That's been a relatively more recent development. So a couple options when that expense does arise. We can either pay for it out of non-departmental, which is a city expenditure that arguably isn't necessarily specific to just administration. It's a cost associated to the whole city, right? You want everyone to kind of have buy-in and support of that position. Or we can just transfer general revenue into this department to pay for that cost, whatever that cost ends up being.
It'll be more than that contingency is listed there.
It will be more than that contingency that's in there. Yes, you're very, very true about that. We have lots of money with some ARPA dollars that we'll discuss later throughout this process. And so maybe allocating X to this department, we can do that and make those changes.
I do have one more question. You said that the salary that came out of this budget was city manager, Jeff, and then Jeff, and then you.
Part of myself.
Part of yours, but the FTE only says 2.05.
Yep. So it's 90% Jeff, 90% Jordan, and 25% me.
I think it's correct.
Is there, not that I wouldn't give it to you, but the salary going up like 125,000, is that kind of just?
Yeah, so that reflects the 6% and 4% COLAs that Jordan's discussed, those
Plus
changes in
PERS.
PERS and insurance costs, as well as I have not been previously, my position hasn't previously been allocated to administration. I was
Okay.
nearly 100% in finance before, but my position has changed, kind of
Okay.
separate from recent developments as deputy, adding the deputy city manager role. I've taken on more of an administrative function as well. So that's just reflecting that change.
I think going back to what you said about the new city manager, you'll have vacancy savings in that position, less any increase that's paid to the interim
Yeah.
position.
So part of the other approach with, the recruitment expenses is potentially a wait and see, pay for it out of this department, see what the savings are with how long that vacancy is there, see where the new city manager comes in at as far as salary range. So I don't think there's an immediate need to worry about how we're going to pay for that recruitment. I think there's still, some time to figure out what's the net impact overall of the administrative
What
budget.
was that reaction?
I'm just thinking that somebody's gonna sit in that seat.
Yeah.
Maybe a cheaper employee, but somebody's gonna sit there for a while, so I don't know that we'll have much savings.
Interim appointment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all
but-
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but you still got 2 instead of 3.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There'll be a lot.
Tyler
Well, I mean, it's gonna be an issue if we draw somebody out of one of our seats here, somebody's gonna have to do some of that work. So we'll probably end up getting somebody put into that seat, so I don't want to say what seats we're talking about yet, but certainly, I think it's gonna cost us, we will not have any salary. That's,
You're still down a
Just-
person.
Yeah, you still have one FTE savings.
I mean, I understand that it's not going to be the full savings, but you're still down an entire person, and then if somebody steps up or whatever, you're still down in the
And
organization.
Jordan does stuff, so we need someone to do those things that he won't be doing. Right?
Yeah, but you're paying an individual work out of class to do a step up to do additional work, but
Right.
you still have that opening.
Still have that
FTE, so
FTE.
Right.
it becomes a net wash and you make money. You'll have vacancy savings because of the absent employees.
we're not gonna change the budget anyway, it sounds like, so I'm cool with where we're at.
Any other?
I'm just going to highlight a couple accomplishments and goals really quick for this department, and then we'll move on to the next one. Thanks to Jeff and his creative approach to marketing our newsletter and getting information out, and the whole communications aspect of his role, we've seen an increase in our readership of the Sandy Source newsletter, as well as website visits, thanks to all the links, I think, in that newsletter, and really have worked tirelessly, you could say, on getting communications out to members of the public and getting more information out to them so they're aware of all of the large projects and programs we have going on, new programs that other departments are working on, and really sort of made that a priority to get more engagement. And then, of course, for upcoming goals of the biennium, implement the new city council goals, facilitate more public engagement, and then we will be deploying a new meeting management software, hopefully in July.
So what do you mean by that?
Instead of iCompass, it'll be a new, well, why don't,
Yeah, it's gonna be fully integrated with our website, so you don't have to click between different websites. It's gonna be a lot easier. It's also gonna be easier on the internal side as well.
And then one of the goals that came out of our council retreat was to do some updates to this room. Where is that, we're going to be reflected in the budget, if at all?
likely non-departmental. I think we have a little bit of computer and software upgrades allocated in non-departmental, but part of that's also going to be a larger conversation of, are we just looking at a couple monitors and, some new computers, or are you wanting like a revamp? And maybe that's part of the contingency that's there.
Okay.
Or facilities, depending on if it's a structural, long-term asset that we can capitalize.
Okay.
Legal. So legal department houses all things associated with our legal services. Those services are contracted with Erie Eldner and Cameron. They have been for several years. And they get pretty consistent and good advice and coverage from them. We're anticipating a relatively flat or very flat cost associated with the city attorneys. And then this year built in a small contingency in this department as well, in the event that costs overrun or we get hit with some sort of land use application that needs extensive review. But we've sort of maintained over the last several years, in that, $200,000 to $250,000 biennial expense, and we're anticipating a similar trajectory for the upcoming 2-year period.
Taking into consideration any legal aspects for the sewer treatment and the moratoriums and those types of things.
I mean, we took into account some of those larger, land use issues we were having a year or two ago. Shane Meadows, those things were part of that 241,000 in 1921 and built into that 250,000. A lot of that has sort of wrapped up, but we might have new land use issues with some of the other moratorium impacts and things like that. So I think it's a good capture of dropping off some of the old things we've had that have been finalized and trying to be thoughtful that there might be some new things that come up and have the ability to absorb those. Municipal court. So we have operated a municipal court here in Sandy. It's basically just traffic. We don't do anything misdemeanors or anything like that. We have an appointed judge, Karen Lisbon, who is also the justice of the peace with Clackamas County Justice Court. She's been our judge here for years and years and years and years and years and years.
Did you?
Oh, yeah, she was here.
Yeah.
When I was a
20
counselor and.
I want to say it's like 25 or 26 years, maybe
I
now.
would say or more.
Or more, yeah. So we have a great working relationship with her. We mimic much of what our court does off of what Justice Court at Clackamas County does for sort of ease of access.
Yeah, a long time Sandy resident too. Her husband taught
Yep.
at high school.
Yep. And so, we plan on allocating $135,000 of general revenue to the municipal court for its general operations. The fines and assessments at $10,000 are really built on suspension fees or payment plan fees that we charge any of the defendants that come up to the front counter. And then personnel really reflects just about half of an FTE of an employee that's working dedicated to municipal court. We've got 2% contingency built in there, and then most notably on the materials and services side, the vast majority of that 32,000 is related to the expense specifically for the judge. We buy some supplies, pay some software fees out of there, but mostly it's.
When we weren't doing in-person processing of fees or complaints, citations.
Yeah.
We did almost 2/3 more, 1,300 processed citations as opposed to 800. I mean, can you do them faster with Zoom? We give out more tickets?
So citations processed is really what is written by the police department and then processed at the front counter.
Yeah.
So, there was a pre-pandemic time where we had a traffic officer that was a traffic officer position that was fully staffed. That and Chief or Lieutenant Landry could speak more to this when they talk about the police budget, but that tends to be the position that kind of gets eliminated first when we have a vacancy, because we have, agreement in place with the school district for the SRO positions. We can't really pull from those. You're still going to need your detective. You still have to staff patrol positions. So traffic is unfortunately the first that sort of gets cut, so to speak, that dedicated person. And so the citation just sort of ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
Question, it's just a comment, but, I almost feel like this whole thing should just be folded into the police department, because all the revenue we get from the fines that she imposes goes directly to the police department. And yet, we're using additional general fund money to pay this thing. And I don't quite understand why that's how, just simplify it, put it all into the police department. And, if you want to give them another 100, whatever it is, 35,000 or something, 65,000, whatever.
Yeah, the thought process behind
135,000 in general fund, then.
the thought process behind it is to really help display that they're two separate departments, that the municipal court is not enforcing a citation or enforcing a judgment to generate revenue for the police department that they're also being paid out of. It is the judge operating independently from the
Some of the cities
officers.
down in Southern Oregon that basically funded their city through the police departments.
We can do that.
That's not my department.
No.
I just collect the money.
I get the appearances thing. I just kind of think
One off of I-5.
it just seems.
Down by Eugene.
Questions.
Yes.
First one is, where is what the justice court brings in accounted for specifically? Like, I'd be curious, like what percentage of the justice court is funded based on its kind of its own revenue, for lack of better terms.
So any of the citation specific revenue that comes into our municipal court is reflected in the police department under municipal or under traffic citations.
So it does go to the PD.
That goes to the PD. The only revenue that the municipal court generates are the payment plan fees and the suspension fees when we suspend a license, because that's an act that is, you know, sort of above and beyond what the normal process would be, right? We'd expect you to come in and pay your citation, and that revenue goes to the police department and the court clerk just processes it. But anything that requires additional touching, so to speak, of that citation. So now we're checking in monthly to make sure you've made your payment. Now we've had to, you know, fax the DMV or refax a reinstatement. And so those things specifically go into the court to offset the time associated with processing that paperwork.
So this shows 320 in 1920 and 350 estimated last biennium and this biennium.
Talking about citation revenue.
Well, it says municipal court fines.
Yeah, so you jumped to the police department budget.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
you said it was. So
Yeah.
just to answer Rich's question, because I had the same question.
The lion's share of those funds are not just for the police department, they go to other government agencies as well. Much more than that amount goes to state agencies.
Yeah.
And not just the police department actually gets a small portion.
You know, 350, but it covers the cost of the program, so that's important.
Yes. Any other municipal court questions? Seeing none. Finance, my favorite department. The finance department is responsible for all things finance related for the city. We do budget, audit, utility billing, accounting, dabble in collections, financial reporting, risk management, pretty much anything that has numbers associated to it falls into this category. Predominant source of funding is the indirect service revenue from all the other departments. And the predominant expenditure is personnel. A close second is materials and services. And of that $160,000 in materials and services, it's something like 79%, 78% is directly related to the cost of conducting our annual audit. So a little bit of money to buy supplies, a little bit of money to make sure that if I go to a conference, I get reimbursed for my gas, but the vast majority of things are state required or federally required audits that get paid for out of this area. And then again, we limited that contingency in this department down to 2%, just to have a little bit of a buffer there for unexpected expenditures that may arise. One accomplishment for the department is we submitted for and received the Distinguished Budget Presentation, Popular Annual Financial Report, and Annual Comprehensive Financial Report through the Government Finance Officers Association. That's kind of called the Triple Crown Award. And there's only 317, I'm going to just talk about myself for a minute, 317 agencies internationally that receive the Triple Crown. There's only 5 in Oregon that received that designation, and we are one of those 5 municipalities. So it might not seem like a big deal, but it is a lot of effort. Thank you. That goes into that does get it recognized.
You and
so.
Seabiscuit.
Yeah, right. Thank you. You can just call me Seabiscuit. from now on. I love it.
Oh,
And then moving forward, we're going to keep, you know, doing all of those financial reports and submitting those for awards. But we also want to try and find ways to increase transparency and get better information, more frequent information out to the public. So we're not just talking about, hey, we're doing this big project, but here's, you know, how your tax dollars are spent, and here's where it goes, and here's why some money can't be used for other things. We get lots of questions on why can't you just do this? Well, because that's a dedicated funding source that's allocated specifically for X. We can't, you know, operate this other endeavor with those funds. So really want to continue to make progress in that area. And then we've had an increase in insurance claims over the last few years. Really want to try to dive into why that is and how we can mitigate some of those insurance claims. Doesn't mean those all resulted in a payout, but just there's things that happen that make people make a claim, and how can we mitigate that or streamline the process and the efficiency in which we close those out. So I'm not spending an inordinate amount of time being the middleman between the insurance company and the client. And then budget highlights, already talked about materials and services. The other big item to note here is that we have finally separated out the human resources functions from finance and created its own dedicated departments. We can really be transparent in what is finance related and what is people management related. So you'll see the decrease in FTE there from 2.67 in the current biennium down to 1.3, 23-25 biennium, which is essentially a portion of my time and a portion of our accounting clerk's time. The other 25% of her time is dedicated, or 20% of her time is dedicated to payroll, which is paid for out of HR, which we'll talk about next. Yes.
Would it be safe to say that if we just added HR to finance and looked at the two, you could see the difference from year over year, maintain the
Close.
same rate of advance?
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of an allocation change, again, because my time now isn't 100% finance, part of it's going into admin, so you have to account for that too. But generally speaking, yes, you'd see a pretty consistent trajectory of biennium over biennium with those two departments added together.
And so requirements are 6 and 5, that's about $1.2 million. Yeah, $1 million. So from 6 to 8 to $1 million.
Yeah.
All right.
This shows that working at home, you have more insurance claims.
Yeah, imagine that.
2020.
Is that the insurance benefit that the payout for insurance claims?
No, so this just reflects in the performance measures, just the number of insurance claims that people filed. Very few of those materialized into any sort of payout, but you know, if people perceive they have an issue or eligibility to file a claim, I want to dig into why that is and what are we doing or what are we not doing to help prevent that.
Well, I was just curious if we have salaries dropping by $200,000, which then reflects in both PERS and workers benefit fund, all of those drop as you drop that down, but yet insurance benefit has gone from 4,000 to 34,000.
Yeah, that insurance benefit line is the health insurance for the employees allocated there. So our budgeting practice here is that we budget, when we build the budget for personnel, we look at what is that employee currently enrolled in. And if we know for sure that's going to change, let's say I have an employee that's 8 months pregnant, I don't. If that was the case, I would change their insurance benefit in the upcoming budget cycle to, you know, reflect that change. And so this is just reflecting what we know for insurance benefits going into the next biennium, which is an enrollment or eligibility change.
Hefty increase.
Yeah,
Yep. They're part of that's just people's lives and situations change, right?
Right.
Spouse might retire, you might need to get on the city's insurance when you weren't on the city's insurance before. Spouse switches jobs and doesn't have as good of benefits with their new employer, so they hop onto this, you know, insurance plan. That's essentially what that reflects without going into particulars of.
And then membership is what, gym memberships or membership to a country club or?
Memberships are memberships to Government Finance Officers Association, International City Managers Association, and
Augusta
there's
National.
one other, what's that?
I said Augusta National.
And Augusta National, my Seabiscuit racing brand that I run.
Horse racing
Well,
association.
I just wonder because it has two actuals of $800 and then we budgeted for 2,000. So we haven't got an actual for that.
Yep.
That yet, but then we more than 2.5 times it to 5,000.
Yeah, the change between 1921 and 21-23 was that same time where my position changed from finance director to deputy city manager / finance director. And so membership to International City Managers Association was added to my sort of list of memberships. It's not a cheap membership, but it's good value and good networking and good peers to bounce ideas off of, get questions answered from. So it's just reflects the change in my duties.
And I don't know if it reflects it in the finance, but I know in other city aspects, memberships were based off their size of the city. And back when we were under 10,000, we paid a lot less in some memberships. as soon as we hit that 10,000 mark, those prices jumped quite drastically. So we gotta remember those things. We're growing as a city, so sometimes it costs us.
This one's based on your salary, so
based on-
I mean, it ebbs and flows, right? It can-
Yeah, there's other
having that
reasons.
position, it might be cheaper or more expensive, so.
Especially in government, things like cities where you got a small city that couldn't go to afford it if it, so you'll see those things throughout.
Human resources. As I mentioned, we pulled this out from the finance department, which is why you'll see three columns of zeros there. We don't have any actual information or budgeted information for this department because it's new. 92% of the budget is related to personnel services.
We have to jump ahead in the documents, page 40.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Put it in order.
Well, we had to consolidate. You didn't want me to jump on and then jump back and jump back in and jump back out. So I'm trying to give you the Tyler show here for a few minutes. See, it's a good show. Everyone made it to the finance or the HR page? Great. So dedicated revenue source here is indirect service cost again. So all the departments that have personnel in them pay into HR. And 92% of the budget goes directly to personnel services, which is our HR director, and 20% of our accounting specialist, which is her responsibility related to payroll. And then materials and services and contingency, it's supplies, we're trying to develop a better onboarding process for all of our new hires. Years and years ago, we used to have a nice leather bound notebook that everyone got when they first came. And you had
I have one.
and I still have mine. Probably not going to do a leather bound notebook again, but we'd like to have a more, welcoming process of here's a branded water bottle, have an onboarding sort of day, which, get Angie out with the new employee, meet key people in the city. So it's not just a bam, here's new hire paperwork, see you later. Have a more, welcoming process that doesn't cost a lot, but will hopefully start off the employee experience here in a much better, more professional way than we have in the
The other
past.
thing is the cost of acquiring new employees and then maintaining them, because you see everywhere.
Yep.
Help wanted, understaffed. It gets old.
Yeah.
It's nice to actually keep it once you get
And this department
by
will pay.
treating them the right way when they come on board.
Yep. And this department will cover sort of the basic cost of recruiting more employees. If you have, a specialized function that wants to be, and you want to post it on a specialized planning board, for example, like Association of Planners, that department's going to pay for the specialized approach on the recruitment side, but your standard job postings and recruitment materials will get paid for in this department as well.
So when we incur HR related costs, like when we utilize a search firm like we did with Public Works, I'm assuming that must just roll into the Public Works budget for that example. As we do one for the city manager search, that's going to just roll into the administration budget rather than land in HR.
Likely so, yep.
Okay. Is there a reason for that?
The branding and marketing. fees for. That's gonna come out of, let's say, we gotta get a new city manager, it's gonna come out of excuse me.
Yeah,
Their
branding,
space, but what's 25?
branding and marketing is gonna be whatever sort of
Good catch.
onboarding, a nice water bottle. $25, get it branded, I don't have like an exhaustive list of every item that we'll buy. Most departments have branding and marketing. On the utility side, most of that is related to uniforms or other sort of, marketing or
Yeah, I'm
branding.
not saying that-
Longest Day Parkway.
I'm not saying that branding and marketing is a bad thing for anything in our different departments. It just seemed like it was a significant piece of funding there for something that didn't seem like it was a lot. But it seems like we do need to get out there. We need to make sure people know that we're here, employees that we're going to bring on. Those kind of things make some difference if we're going to brand and market them. So that's what that's for, right?
Yep.
For 2 years.
For 2 years.
Yeah,
it's
$100 a month. Yep, and contractual services, I'll beat one of you to the punch, because that might be the next question that comes up. Contractual services in this department is related to any sort of consulting fees that we have. We have a third party that helps facilitate any sort of like pay equity study that we need to do or a compensation analysis for a position if we're adding a new position, ensuring that it falls appropriately on our pay scale to ensure that, you know, we mitigate the claim that like we favorably placed it here because we think it's valued here. We have a third party that does that. It's a really inexpensive cost to ensure that we are complying with the Oregon pay equity law, as well as, you know, mitigating any sort of assertion that we're not treating all employees fairly when we have a salary change or a position change.
So the employee recruitment is $7,000. That's because it's the HR department that we're gonna be using that to spread across all the other.
That'll pay for all of your basic League of Oregon Cities, LinkedIn. You know, Angie has an exhaustive list. Like there's like 4 or 5 places where we always post. I can't think of all those sites off the top of my head right now, but position advertisements. Yep. Yep.
Follow up to mine though.
Yes.
Why don't we allocate those search firms in human resources instead of putting it in the individual departments?
My philosophy on that is the HR budget as a whole is paid for by everyone, but we have a specific likely high cost expense related to a public works director or a city manager or a finance director that really shouldn't be paid for out of a split that everyone else is paid into. It's a, you can you know, easily identify that as a cost associated with Department X, and therefore they should pay for it.
I would add to that whichever department, say Jenny's department, I'm not to pick on you, Jenny, but you know, when there's a period of where they don't have the position filled and you're recruiting and all that, they've got some salary savings to help cover the cost of that search.
Yep.
So it is kind of good to have the benefiting.
Yeah, and we don't have a large contingency built into human resources. You know, it's a little over $6,000, and so that could be gone. One job, it's gone, and now we're either getting general revenue allocation transferred back in or going out to all the other departments to ask for more money to balance this budget. Non-departmental. So I mentioned, oh, you're gonna flip backwards. No, you're gonna flip forward. I'm sorry. A few pages.
The next, usually you can tell us what page it's on.
Page 6.
Page 16. All right, so non-departmental, as the title suggests, is, you know, the area where we house all of the expenses for the city that can't be attributed to one specific department. So it's sort of a placeholder in some respect. It also has the city's overall contingency in this department. And so it looks very large, but there's not a ton of activity, generally speaking, that happens in non-departmental outside of the day-to-day sort of utility costs of City Hall or memberships and things like that. No FTE are allocated to this department. And there's no debt service paid for out of this department because there's no debt that's not identified specifically to a department. You will see that previously there was some debt service that was lease payments on the pool car that we have parked out back. That gets used by everyone, which is why it's paid for out of non-departmental and not specific.
So if we ever need any money someplace else for something that's not in there, we just go here.
You may recall that practice.
Yes.
Yes, that has generally, when we talk about, you know, the city's overall contingency, or we have a rainy day fund, this is where that rainy day fund or reserves is held. So accomplishments, well, I want to talk a little bit more about this. Jump ahead. So essentially, in this area, materials and services houses insurance costs, as well as various organizational fees and memberships that can't be attributed to anything specific. For example, our League of Oregon Cities membership is paid for out of this department. Our National League of Cities, Tree City USA, all of those sorts of large umbrella memberships that, you know, the city finds value in being a part of is paid for out of this department, as well as a good portion of the city's liability insurance. Mayor Pulliam probably is the most well-versed in the insurance area of things in this room at the moment, but insurance costs continue to rise. That's not any different for us here. Factored in a 10% insurance increase in this budget, which I think will probably be right up against based on the preliminary numbers that I've seen. Our insurance is through City County Insurance Services, which is about 90% of cities in Oregon are insured through CIS. So it's a large insurance pool that we have. It's not only property and liability, but we have our auto insurance through there, as well as our cyber insurance that has been a key piece of ensuring that we have security and confidence that if we do have a cybersecurity issue, we won't be out, tons of money in a situation like that. And in this transfers for this department of that $685,000 is the transfer that Jordan mentioned to the street fund to sort of maintain the solvency of that fund and help build back up the available.
Question.
Yes.
So if we're transferring, it looks like every year, $85,000 to the facilities maintenance fund, why aren't we just increasing the amount that we put in the facilities maintenance fund? Instead of transferring that every single year?
So the facilities maintenance fund is developed by these transfers. So general fund and then the utility funds pay into the facilities maintenance fund.
Okay.
So the intent originally when that was started was to build up enough capital so that we wouldn't have to either drain contingency or go get a short-term loan for like $100,000 repair on a building. But it's intended for,
So it's allocated directly from there.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thanks.
And then of the contingencies, we have contingency market 2.1 million. A little over 1.1 million of that maintains our contingency policy of 5% of operations. And then the remaining 950,000 or so is what Jordan talked about with ARPA and general fund surplus that the budget committee can deliberate over later on tonight or at the next meeting. Questions on non-departmental?
Oh, it's a small question. So,
Yeah.
I would just on the breakdown, employee recognition spent 10,000 in 17-19, spent 5,000 19-21, and then we budgeted 10,000 for 21-23, and then we doubled it to 20,000. But FTE didn't go up that much. So what's the
Right. So
program
past
change?
practice before Jordan was here, we would do one party that cost about $10,000 for employees every other year. And on the off years, there was just no real acknowledgement or anything like that. A picnic. Then, we had feedback from a few council members over the last couple years and really sort of a desire to increase the staff experience, so to speak. And really, we can't always match CPI on a cost of living adjustment side. We're not always going to pay the highest out of, every agency that's local to us. So what can we do to really show our employees that we appreciate them and value them? And so we're trying to move towards something every year. And ideally, maybe 2 smaller things every year, like a winter appreciation and then a spring, summer appreciation, so that we can, show our employees that they are valued. If you can't make it to one, you make it to the other one. Yeah, exactly. We are spread out over 7 different buildings, and so many of us don't see each other on a regular basis. So it's also, showing appreciation, but the team building aspect of the face-to-face, like, hey, how's life going down at the ops center? I don't see any of you because you're at the ops center or you're out, the officers, especially out on the road where they're not seeing staff, on a regular basis. And so the intent really is just to show our
Highly
employees that
suggest you all go throw axes at the.
we've tried and we have not had success.
I think it's even more important now with people working from home and having that hybrid work schedule as well as this. We find the same challenge in my office, and I think a lot of people after 2020.
I will tell you, the last event we had, the summer picnic, it was maybe 30% of our staff that showed up, but I didn't hear a single negative thing from any of them. I mean, it was well received. People had a great time. It was a hot day, but it was, it was a good way to show employees that made it, that we value what you do, and we're grateful for your the holiday lunch as well. Yep. So all good feedback we've had.
All right, so fireworks display, I see you got something for this budgeted year. Is that because we're planning on CCB?
We have
taking care of it?
We have moved a couple programs out of non-departmental into an actual department that it moved into the actual department that does the program. So for example, fireworks is really a recreation event, and so you'll see that recognized in the recreation department. Same thing with I think it's community events, or what do we call it? Yeah, community events, that there's nothing budgeted there this time. That's going to recreation as well.
Okay, then I know we're gonna get a couple groans here, but I see you taking out arts budget there.
I knew it was coming.
We do have some art issues. We got some repair stuff coming. I see there's zero there. And there's $5,000 that we didn't spend way back when. So where would that normally come out? We got some murals that are at that point. Some other things that need to be taken care of. Where's that at? They get back into recreation?
No, it didn't. We don't have any money allocated for a specific art project in this budget, in this proposed budget.
So I can put that up on the contingency thing that we talked about earlier.
We also talked about getting grants and, outside fundraising sources. I think the mayor mentioned that.
Yeah.
That's the money in the
presidential
murals.
statutes.
That's money.
If there's something that needs to be maintained or fixed, that's $500. I'm not gonna allocate
Maybe
it
has some stuff.
from an accounting perspective to Arts Commission, and that's just put that under repairs and
This
maintenance.
is
So,
not new stuff. This is just making sure. we don't lose what we got.
yeah, no, we don't have anything allocated for a specific art project or anything like that, but general repairs and maintenance, if someone calls us and says, you've got 6 screws that popped out, we're gonna go just repair those things as we normally would.
Okay.
Small dollar things will get absorbed in repairs and maintenance somewhere.
Carl, I love your passion. That's good. I just wanted to throw that out.
We haven't talked about roads yet here.
Don's got a couple
Intersection.
questions.
Thanks. Organizational fees, big jump. There's a couple of these that have big jumps. Can you just kind of walk through them and just tell us what's going on?
Yes. I don't have that spreadsheet open yet, so hold on just a moment.
No problem. Talk about the arts for a while.
I got my allocated groans, so I'm okay.
So the organizational fees are the lobbyists that we have currently. That's getting paid for out of there. Primarily, that's what that is. There's some other small amounts for League of Oregon Cities membership, and the Lane Council of Governments, which is, not to get too far in the weeds, but that's the third party that we contract with for our HR services for that independent review. It used to be Local Government Personnel Institute. They were defunct essentially and got absorbed by a different government entity. So it's a small membership fee that's absorbed in that line as well.
For the budget committee members, we really liked our new lobbyists, so. Books and subscriptions jumped up.
Yeah, that includes our annual membership for our digital archive software. It's a subscription. It's been allocated to a different line item previously, but it's part of that cleanup of condensing things that make sense. That's just one of those.
Cable programming, what does that cover? I mean, it didn't go up that much, but what is it?
That should probably be retitled to meeting management software and not cable programming.
Oh.
It used to be cable programming. I think Stan ran the camera.
I did run the camera. I love talking about that.
All right.
Zoom's in council, so that's
Yeah. You remember me back there doing that? Remember? All right.
The last one, furniture and office equipment.
In your
has
youth.
Yeah.
an expense that it hasn't had for a few years.
Yes, so I allocated $10,000 to redo the front counter at City Hall. If you're familiar with that space, it's really just the back side of a desk that is supporting the entire, first appearance of our building, or for our patrons that come in. Yeah, so I'd like to spend a little bit of money to actually build some sort of a half wall, get a nice counter that's not V-shaped because it's bent. Just a little, make it a nice experience when you walk through the front doors.
It also needs to be ADA accessible.
Well, we absolutely need an ADA counter, which would be part of that. And really just, it's still purple from the 1990 remodel, and I hate it.
So,
If I'm being completely
if you're trying
candid
to
with
sell
you.
it, Sell it for the ADA.
Yeah.
I was
No,
gonna
it's structurally unsound. It's wobbly on one side. There's not electrical
I just
components
wanted
in
to
it.
know what it was. Thank you.
I had a question where, and maybe it hasn't been coming yet. Remember the special services contracts that we do? Is that in here or somewhere?
Economic
else?
development.
It's in, okay, got it,
Yep.
thank you.
It used to be in this department. That was moved 1 or 2 biennium ago to economic development. Quickly, we funded 2 business grants for outdoor covered structures out of this department. In the current biennium, those 2 were 2 restaurants that weren't located in the urban renewal district. So this was the logical place to fund them out of. And then, of course, the continued goal is to just increase the overall contingency. So we have a nice rainy day fund for those unexpected expenditures. Already touched on this, about 950,000 or so of undesignated fund balance and the remaining ARPA funds to talk about. And
how much more do you have in your presentation?
I'm gonna kick it over to Greg, and then we're gonna transition into library, police, come back to me for Parks and Rec.
I just wonder if we wanted to do a 5
Yeah.
minute.
Building, yeah, I mean, we
recess.
probably have a good hour and a half.
Why don't we go ahead and do
2 hours.
it?
Excuse me. Mayor,
But
you
there's
might have
questions
more.
this
I
time.
know, that's why I looked over.
These were the easy ones.
Kara, what do you think about a 5-minute recess?
We can take a 5-minute recess, but I'd still like to try and be out of here by 10 o'clock.
Sell me
You're
out.
here. No, you're here.
I would like to be out of here by 9.
Yeah.
I would like to be out of here by 9, but we're already sitting here at 8 o'clock. And they have police and library, and I don't want to short shrift those, so.
Okay.
When we get to 9 o'clock, we can see what's left and see if we want to carry it over to the next meeting. We've got 2. Missing anybody? A couple. But we can go. Over these.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, good evening. My name is Greg Brewster. For those who haven't met me, I am the IT director here. And for the information technology, I'll just go on and hop through to the next one there. So IT department manages all the computers, electronic systems, including network connectivity, email services, security, software, and licensing management. I'm sure I missed a few in there, but there's several smaller roles and services that we have. We consist of 1.3 full-time employees. And if you, I didn't mention it before here, I think it's page 74. That one says 62.
62.
Okay, 74 on the PDF, 62 on paper.
Yeah.
Is where it starts there. And of that 1.3 FTE, that includes 1 full-time systems administrator, which handles servers, desktops, support for the internal city and staff, as well as 2 partials, myself at 0.15 and our network engineer at 0.15. And our department goal is to help identify, implement, maintain the technology components for each of the department's operations within the city and help them fulfill their goals and services. So
Where do you
our,
spend the rest of your time? 0.1 something or other? So
yeah,
where's your 0.89, whatever?
my 0.85 exists on the Sandy Net side mostly. Oops. Oh, it did update. Okay, so last biennium here, we mostly implemented security features and focused on 2-factor authentication with the rise in cyber attacks and other issues that I'm sure everyone's kind of read about that's been focused towards city governments and other levels of governments. So 2-factor authentication for remote connections was a huge thing that we went ahead and implemented, as well as implementing other cyber policies for internal from restoration and focusing on backups, just so that we can recover in the event that there is an incident or issue. One of the big drivers for that was getting in compliance for cyber insurance, which, as Tyler mentioned earlier, we do have. And so we definitely want to make sure that we're not just meeting the bare minimum in terms of compliance, but trying to be more of a driver to just not put ourselves in any potential extra risk. As for our goals here, we, as we'll get into here, there's major purchases that we've been putting off here for some time that we do need to refresh some aging network infrastructure. One of these really came to light, I think it was about 4 months ago, when we lost some key networking equipment at our library, and we didn't have replacement equipment on hand to bring it back online. So we ended up kind of begging to and around and looking for some hardware to get us by until we could get a new piece of equipment ordered here. So we put together part of our plan and said, what do we need to refresh? How do we need to get back in line where we need to be and get on a proper replacement schedule? So that includes on the networking side, which is most of the equipment that connects all the buildings and facilities. That includes upgrading our 4 firewalls, which is our first line of defense for security for protecting the city network. It includes upgrading switches, the remaining switches that are not upgraded this biennium at the library, the police department, the community center, as well as in our data center here at City Hall for the city side. Some of these switches are over 13 years old and they haven't failed yet, which is quite amazing to me. Yes, thank you. But they were implemented here before I started back in 2009. So they're way past their lifespan. So
Back when Scott.
yes, back when Scott and Joe were here. So I just remember being here on the first day and they're still there. So that also includes that we want to implement a new backup solution for backing up our city servers, such as utility billing, GIS, police department information. In the event that there's something that's deleted, cyber attack or something that locks that information or it's lost for any reason, we have a backup to be able to restore it. It's identified that one of for a restoration policy that there are certain servers that need to be restored within a matter of hours, while others are classified that can be restored several days later based on their priority. So for that, we do need a backup solution in place. We have one now, but we're looking to upgrade it so that I can actually sleep at night with confidence, knowing that we'll be able to restore in the event of emergency. Additionally, we are also replacing the old city phone system with a new modern solution. That system, once again, was implemented the first year that I was here and continues to work, but is now one of the constraints in actually pushing out faster performance to the individual computers because it's a limiting factor that's now in place in between there. So getting those replaced. And then finally, focusing on security and preventing or mitigating cyber attacks. That one's a huge one. A lot of that's policy based, which is me making the policies and getting it pushed through and then getting the rest of the city in compliance with them. So that one's more just sitting down and actually writing them here. So I'm taking the avenues to actually make it possible so that I can start implementing those myself and gathering the knowledge for it rather than referring or looking just to other documents and trying to go along. The other last piece in here, which is this one is unbudgeted. This is a goal of ours, is a redundant connection for the networking side for our internet connection that comes in here to City Hall. This is more looking for something that goes eastbound. Most of our internet traffic, if not all of it, comes in from the west side towards the metropolitan area. And we'd like to find a redundant path in the event of we all hear about the earthquake or any other emergencies that would cut off those connections. How can we make sure that we are stable, we're able to run? How can we make sure our police department stays online to receive calls, phones work, and how we respond in the event of a major emergency? So, budget highlights. There is obviously a major increase in the computer equipment line item for those 6 to 7 devices, the 2 firewalls, and then the 5 switches there that are on the equipment, as well as replacing the hardware for our virtual server environment, which is nearing its useful life. There's software, some software that's included with that, and a refresh of wireless access points as we begin replacing 1/4 of the access points every biennium. So with the useful life there, we just put it on a cycle to get those replaced there. The contractual services decreases by 10,000 this biennium, mostly because new hardware comes with some of those included for the first few years at least. And so those are, we will see a small decrease there. We also have an increase in personnel costs, which is due to, I think we've already talked about it, PERS, COLA, et cetera. The amount of, there's no more full-time employee dedication, so that number hasn't changed at all. And then we're shooting for a 5% contingency, which a couple years ago when we had some other expenditures with our virtual server system, used up most of that in the past there. So we definitely want to start rebuilding that and getting that back up to where it should be. I believe that's the last slide I have.
What were those contractual services?
Sure. Contractual services are everything from email to Microsoft licensing.
Oh, got it.
Okay, yeah, all of those.
Microsoft.
Drop mic.
And all of those licenses
Jeremy,
don't
any questions?
allocate out to individual departments. Greg's departments absorbs those.
Don has a question for me.
Thanks. Hey, Greg, you've heard some of this from me in regards to Sandy Net on the board, but when I see this budget for capital outlay and I see that jump from 25, 50, 30 and 225, what it tells me is more or less the story that confirms the story that you were saying is that we're not replacing, we're not budgeting, we're falling behind in terms of maintaining the equipment to keep the reliability and security and things that we're looking to do. So, and I mentioned this to the chief a couple of years ago about cars and things like that. We need to be proactively, we know things die, we know they're on a replacement, lifespan of how many useful years they're going to have and how much they cost. I would like to see over time this capital start to even out as we're proactively targeting a reasonable amount of increase. So what we don't know is 225 a stopgap and we're still falling further behind, or is 225 something that's starting to right the ship?
We're starting to write the ship now. So I actually have that plan now in place. So
good.
We've developed it this time around.
So
So
we would expect numbers like this 225 in future bienniums.
to drop off
Similar.
or spread across.
What I don't want to see is a jump like this.
Mhm.
We should see a more evening of capital outlay across the years, but at a sufficient level so that we know we're paying for the future. We're not
Okay.
digging a hole. right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
Second point, I am concerned because of this hole that we're in, this is one where I think a 5% contingency probably isn't enough.
Mhm.
And something I think we should be thinking about, when it comes to that extra money and allocation, we might want to be putting a little more into here for a couple of reasons. You mentioned that you personally will be doing some policy work.
Some of
Do
it,
you
yeah.
want to put some time?
Yep. It's
You
a
shouldn't
goal of
do that.
mine.
That's not your job. You need money, you need to hire it. That policy work is critical to prevent these things we read about on the news from somebody coming in to the city employee, city contractor, hooking up the computer inappropriately, and all of a sudden we lose something critical. I think those policies are very important. I think they need to be funded and they need to be done and implemented ASAP. It's not that you can't do it. I just don't think you should have to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a statement here. I think it's important that all of the directors come to us with an equal assumption in that any increases, let's use this computer, this $225,000 as an example. It needs to be done. It should be done, but it's above and beyond what we would normally expect to see from the department. So let's go to library, for example. They have something they would like to add to their normal budget. As we add these kinds of pieces to the budget, sometime down the road, we're going to run out of money. So in my mind, I would love to see the directors label these kind of things like this computers. We're catching up. It's a crucial piece of work to do, but it's above and beyond. So we can identify we're doing above and beyond stuff. Otherwise,
But it's not above and beyond. This one, that's the problem. It's never been above and beyond. We didn't fund it 3 bienniums ago.
but you're missing the point. I agree with you. I'm not arguing we should take it off of this. I'm just saying that we should identify it as one of those things that that was a big increase that we didn't expect to see. Because Greg identified it as a need. And I'm sure we're gonna find more of those as we go down the road.
But it's more or less delayed maintenance. It's something that should have been done.
Right. You should have been paying for it all along.
I get it, I get
Okay,
it, but
all
I'm
right,
not saying,
Okay.
but I'm just saying, we all need to come to the table with an even assumption. But we
Chris.
got some big increases, we should identify.
It's actually capital expense.
I just have a question about the loan principal and loan interest. It's both at zero. But on a previous, and maybe I'm just looking in the wrong spot, there was the interfund loans. And it had telecommunications for Sandy Net for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Payments being made.
This is for IT, so this is the city infrastructure, not telecommunications, which is the same budget. That's next week.
Jeremy,
Yeah, a little bit on there. I think, we are playing catch up here and there's lifespans, 5 years, we'll use 5 years and then you have to buy it all over again. I think what would be good would be to future budget cycles, be putting in something that can go into a contingency. Maybe it's $50,000 that goes in to replace those things, right?
Yep.
That's what I do. I mean, I run a very large,
label it material replacement or hardware replacement.
something like to that effect, do this for other ones. The contingency, I'm a little scared that it is a little low. And I can tell you right now what goes on in my world, and Stan may have a little bit of background on this for cyber insurance aspects of it. I know because I pay double the amount every year for cyber insurance. And for me, it's going to be $100,000 plus this year. Where I work. And that, but the point being is it's doubling. And so you have some of those things, but the requirements that cyber insurance is putting on to you is saying that you have to have all these things done to even get it. So then, and they tell you in April for those darn insurance guys. But the point is you're scurrying to pay $12,000 or $20,000 to be able to meet it to have the cyber insurance. So just living through this, I know that is really low. In this dollar amount, you talk about the firewall, which are things that will help, but there are other requirements that are coming, I know, that are going to cost this department money, and you want to have cyber insurance. Not just for the safety of it, you also want to be able to protect the data that we have. So anyway, there's maybe we can get that in the future things of allocating a little bit more every year into something that doesn't get robbed by the council or anything like that. Not that the council does that, but that is dedicated for a future improvement in 5 years or whatever it would be.
I think you had Rich up here and then Kathleen that question. I think Jeremy just pretty much said what I was saying. For me. So.
The only question I had, and I agree with everything that's been said, the redundancy internet connection thing going east, is that a Sandy Net thing, or is that just our connection to our offices or something?
It would involve Sandy Net. I mentioned it here because of mostly pertaining to the city pieces for it here. The scope and what I'm looking at would not support all of Sandy Net. But the city would run through Sandy Net as like a prioritized piece for it. So it is, it's something we looked at doing. We looked at getting the costs, I think, towards late last year. And we were talking about trying to figure out where we might be able to come up with funds for it. And then so it's put on as something we want to take care of and get implemented. Based on some of the providers that come through our data center here at City Hall, we have the option of purchasing some equipment that would allow us to go out different directions. And so that's one of our goals is to implement. So I'm actually refreshing it right now over the next couple of weeks to get the finalized cost for it, to figure out what it's at so we could start working towards that.
No,
But
I'm totally support all that. I was just thinking that if there's, possibilities to move that cost to Sandy Net
Mhm.
appropriately, then we should do that or share it or whatever you think is.
yeah, we were going to look at, I was going to look at like a sharing. I didn't know what percentage necessarily, but yeah, it involves both.
Any more questions?
One.
One.
Just
Okay.
one. The 10,000 in supplies, that's a 3X above what was budgeted for last year or this year. And of course, we don't know how much is being expended in that category now. How do we account for $10,000?
So I bumped it up because it did, we had, I think it was 3,000 before,
Mhm.
and I think we're at like 5,000 right now, so it was a little higher. And so that gets, sometimes when you have to buy computer monitors or docks or things like that, you know, is it computer equipment or is it supplies that connect to the computer peripherals? So it's just how it's been allocated between those two. So usually a full computer will come out of the computer's equipment line item. If it's a cable or a dock station or some of these other ones, it comes out of supplies.
Right, but wouldn't you then, if it was a monitor or something like that, not necessarily computer equipment, but office and furniture equipment, would that not be your office monitor?
It could be, it's just that's where I lumped it all in because, yeah.
Just evening out the.
The IT one's a lot simpler.
Evening out the 752 is all.
Yeah.
And I can comment on the fact that all technologies, especially after the pandemic, is all doubled in price. All these monitors, everything from just personal experience.
Greg, you're just shared services for all divisions. Everything IT goes into your budget. Nothing comes out. I haven't seen anything about IT in any other budget so far. So everything shared services from you.
I believe so, yes.
His
Shaking his head.
department is 100% funded by the indirect service revenue, so everyone else is paying in, so Greg can take care of our problems.
Yep.
Make sure we can
Just making sure. That's what I was seeing. So.
log into our computers from home and all that stuff.
Move on to library.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, I'm Sarah McIntyre. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm the library director for the Sandy and Hoodland libraries. So before we start looking at my slides, we need to talk a little bit about library funding. Tyler mentioned the library district earlier. And in 2008, voters of Clackamas County passed a library district for Clackamas County with a tax rate of 0.3974 cents per thousand of assessed value. And all of that assessed value within the city limits of Sandy comes directly to the city of Sandy for the Sandy Library. And then about 44% of Clackamas County is unincorporated. All of that unincorporated money is pooled, and then the money is distributed to the service areas based on the population within that service area. So that is how the library is funded. So the Sandy service area starts near Boring and goes up to the ski camp, Wildcat, Southeast Wildcat Road, I think is near the cutoff there. And then the Hoodland service area starts there and goes up to the county line past government camp. So about 28,000 people live in the Sandy service area. As we know, almost 13,000 of those are the city of Sandy. So the unincorporated residents are about 15,100 people. And then the Hoodland unincorporated population is 5,700. So. Any question about the library funding or library service areas? Okay. So Sandy Library. So before we get started really looking at this slide, I need to pass out a sheet. It was pointed out to me recently that this is the first year that the Hoodland budget is pulled out of the Sandy budget. So all of the numbers for the previous bienniums are Sandy and Hoodland together. When we look at the Sandy budget this year, it's just Sandy. And then we're going to look at the Hoodland budget separately. So the sheet that I'm passing around is something that Tyler created. And it shows the total for Sandy and Hoodland, so you can compare that to previous bienniums without having to do all the complicated math in your head. So you'll notice a few things in the Sandy budget. You'll notice the intergovernmental, that is the library district funding. And that is the largest portion of our funding. So the city of Sandy, I think it's about 6% this year of the Sandy budget is the money that comes from the city. And about half of that is our loan for the library, which Tyler mentioned earlier. There are a couple other things you may notice. The fines and fees are much lower than they have been in previous years. And I'll talk about that later a little bit. And the miscellaneous revenue is much lower than it had been in the previous biennium. And that huge bump in the 1921 biennium was a fundraiser from the Friends of the Library. They raised money for our computers. So
I think the fines and fees are the Pulliam girls getting older, not losing their books.
yeah.
Count me in.
Yeah, during COVID, we weren't charging fines. And I'll do the spoiler now, I guess. We are reducing our fines to 10 cents a day rather than 25 cents a day. And that is, you've heard me talk about equity and library services before, and fines are a large barrier to our patrons who need to use the library the most. So this reduction to 10 cents that all Clackamas County libraries are doing is in the hopes that maybe in the next biennium, we will not see any fines and fees revenue in there, and that we will not be charging fines.
So, I mean, sometimes that fine was the only reason someone ever returns the book.
Bad with my son, that was totally. his.
About 80% of the items come back well before they're due.
Okay.
So most people return their items because they want to get more items.
Yeah.
I mean, they come to the library weekly, and for people, and some of that fine revenue is or some of those fines that we assess are never collected. After 7 years, they're wiped away.
Mhm.
You can't keep that like that.
Okay.
And so,
Huh.
you know, and those are people who moved away from the area, maybe took books with them when they moved
And you think,
away.
and you think people don't go to the library because they're worried about the potential fine?
Yeah, I mean, the people who are lowest income hit those fine levels. They have a hard time getting to the library. They may be working 2 jobs. You know, it's difficult for them to get their books back to the library. And once they hit that $25 limit, we never see them again.
Well, it's the families that can't afford to buy their own books to have it. I mean, yeah, it's the least. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there have been studies done that show 80% of those people who hit that fine limit never come back to the library because they can't afford it.
My son's graduation present, we paid off his library fines.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with, for example, last winter, I left a book on the back of my pickup and it hit the ground and somebody ran over it. Was unrepairable, unreturnable. And I paid for it. How would you?
That's a lost fee, and that's a separate line item in the budget detail from fines. So we would still collect those lost fees because that is the real taxpayer money that's lost when people lose those items or destroy those items. That's what we really want. We ultimately want to get our items back so that we can check them out again, right? That's our whole goal. And so, yes, those are the fees that we would continue to collect.
They just don't return it and you don't have to pay.
You okay?
Yeah, just not tell anyone.
Well, I mean, that's the reality of it.
You just can't check anything out.
Right.
it's an honor system.
I'm all for it continuing to fine Carl.
And your
dog.
Yeah.
I mean, you can also look at fines in the way that it takes more staff time to assess fines and collect fines than it does than what you bring in. So, and it's, you know, a negative customer service experience when we want to have positive customer service experiences. So, yeah.
So not to get sidetracked, but there was a conversation about paying off the rest of the loan. So at that point, then you'll obviously have more money in your budget moving forward after that because it's no longer an obligation to pay off that loan, correct?
Maybe not. Maybe the city would decide not to give me that money that they were giving me when they were paying the loan. because
Oh, but-
that's
I
the,
thought that was directly out of intergovernmental, like out of the county and stuff, or is that some of that's coming out? of
that's in the
general
general
fund?
revenue.
That's in the- We pay that on the general fund.
Yeah,
Oh, we
the
do.
city pays
Okay,
that.
got it.
The
Half-
IGA,
92,000 of that
No, go ahead.
200 and
IGA
some
with
odd
Clackamas County doesn't
is,
allow for capital
206,000.
costs to be paid for out of that intergovernmental agreement.
Okay.
It's been the general fund that's been paying that for the last 10 years.
Since
however.
2012, yeah.
They allotted money,
It's 92,000 for the
certain amount,
mortgage.
2 million or whatever it was, to do the
And
improvements.
out of the
That-
206,000 in general fund
We
money.
had an $800,000
Yeah,
loan.
two-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
92,000. How are we gonna, just, I mean, that did kind of come up, I don't know if you, way earlier, but we are gonna have a balloon payment in like 7 years or 2027. So how are we gonna be able to pay that? Or do we need to just plan for that in the general fund or?
Options, I mean, it's a couple years out still. Historically, we've refinanced it, so that's always in our back pocket. It's at 2.75% right now, so I
Yeah.
don't expect currently or at the end of it's like 490 right now. I think we're looking at about 330 would be the balloon payment, somewhere in that ballpark. It's not a huge sum of money. If we are strategic about wanting to pay it off, I think we can easily find room within the general fund to do so.
I was just,
Still a few
we
years
have
out.
a fairly healthy carryover, and so I was just wondering, is it prudent to kind of just throw another 50,000 or something at, kind of in the next few years, kind of, throw another 50 or $80,000 towards it to, make it not quite so bad, or we'll just wait till it happens. I don't know if there's some options there for you.
I think part of the reason why you floated the idea of potentially paying that off early too is realizing that interest rates probably aren't going to be 2.75%. And so we want to extend it out for another 5 years at 6.8 or 6.9, like, current rates are. Personally, from a finance perspective, probably not the smartest move. So I think there's some weighing of how much added interest we would be paying versus can we scrape together, this final $100,000 that we might not have readily available where it can be located at.
All right. So we finished a link-wide strategic plan in this last biennium. Analyzed Sandy Library's collections for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, we're still working on our strategic plan. Our current strategic plan ends in June of 2024, so we'll have to begin working on the next one before the end of this biennium. So that will be exciting. And then our goals, I'm hoping to encourage, we need to get the link directors to somehow push forward the idea of the task force, maybe not in the task force itself. So for those of you who have been here for a while, you've heard about this library task force. We had one meeting before the pandemic started and then it shut down because we never even had a chance to elect chairs or anything like that. So, and it was 85 plus people, was people from every library in the district. And so it was a little unwieldy looking back on it. So we're hoping to move forward somehow with that idea in a new way, maybe with a consultant. I'm hoping to find funding sources for an outreach technology pop-up vehicle. It's not in my budget for this year. Spoiler alert, Counselor Exner. But I'm still hoping to find that funding.
How much is that?
Somewhere around $250,000.
Wasn't there grants available though?
Pardon?
Wasn't it a grant of project?
There was a grant that was out there with ARPA funds and we did not receive the grant. So, and generally those large size grants do not come around for libraries very often. Andy has offered to look for them in her venue. It's basically a bus. So if we could get something through Andy finding something in the transit arena, that might do it for us. But
I want that to be part of our conversation. Whether we all come to a consensus on or not. I know we have areas that we want for the campus and everything else, but I'd like that to be bantered about with some of the extra money we have.
Sharon,
Not hearing.
I just wanted to be bannered about some of the extra funds that we have to allocate. It's been a goal, Sarah's, for 5 years now. I think
And
it
this
would be
vehicle
awesome.
could be used by any city department. Public Works could take it out with charts with water things in it, and, you know, it would have the city branding on it, so it would be highly visible. So it would be a great vehicle. Parks and Rec, we could go to the parks with it. It would be a lot of fun. We could go to community events, all kinds of things. So
I would like to see it put up on some sort of a attention list toward the end when we start looking at what we need to do with that extra dollars. And we don't have it, we don't fund it.
And that's what I mean.
That's what
It's-
you said.
I couldn't hear
It's
you.
exactly, yeah, no problem. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
You know, and the Sandy Community Action Center has, you know, a band they've bought in the last couple of years. I've seen some communities go out into more you know, into different communities with food options along with library services. There's a lot of collaboration. I'd love to talk about it. It'd be very cool for our community.
And then the Sandy Library is working towards piloting a program in Clackamas County to get every kid in our school district a public library card. I'm really excited about this program. There are lots of kids who come into the library who don't have a library card, and if we could get them through their schools, they would have full access to the library. Right now, we give them a temporary card and send a letter home to their parents, and it's very complicated. This would streamline all of that, and just it would be great to see all those kids in the library. Yeah. And then, of course, we're continuing to work on our strategic plan. And here's where I talked about the fine estimates and reducing the fines to 10 cents a day. And then the miscellaneous revenue line was very low. And you'll notice that the detail of the budget, the programming line is 0. And it's not because we're not going to be doing programs. It is because the Friends of the Library they started a library endowment years ago, and they've just turned it over that we just get an annual disbursement from the Oregon Community Foundation from the Friends of the Library endowment. And that money is earmarked specifically for programs. And so it's going into the dedicated trust fund for the library, and then we'll spend the money out of that trust fund.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah. So here's where we've added a quarter of an FTE, and that's because we're going to be open to additional hours on Saturday mornings to do story time. Story time parents are regularly asking us to do a weekend story time. They can't get in Monday through Friday, they're working, those kinds of things. And so we are hoping to do that in the proposed budget. So we would be open 56 hours a week. We're currently open 54. And then this is the exciting news. The library directors finally voted to increase our e-content budget. The digital line in our budget is higher for Sandy, if you look at the detail, than it was for Sandy and Hoodland. So it's we added 15%, and I'm hoping that they will see the increased usage and next year do another significant increase. So I did a 15% increase in both years of the budget.
You say digital, that's
It's
video,
ebooks and
ebook.
e-audiobooks. Yeah.
Half that's my wife.
Yeah.
Have you thought about doing that with your cards and stuff? Because like the athletic club, they've gone to smartphone, digital signing stuff. Almost everybody's got a digital phone.
You download an app onto your phone that you can download ebooks and e-audiobooks from the library.
I was thinking about the card though. You said you wanted to get a card to everybody.
But every kid doesn't have a phone.
Are you sure?
Every kid does not have a phone. If they can't
Yeah.
afford the 10-cent fine, I mean,
I don't know about that either.
My kids don't have a phone.
Even
No.
kids at the
Really?
high school on
Okay.
free and reduced lunch.
Oh, in
have-
high school.
Have phones.
I'm talking
Nicer
elementary
ones than
school,
me.
Oregon
So,
Trail,
yeah, that could
elementary,
be, yeah.
K
But-
through.
But regardless of that point, I think it's a great idea to have an e-wallet card, so you don't have to carry around your card.
Well, there's a link app that you can add your library card to, so you always have your library card with you. So in effect, we do have,
Yeah,
Okay. all right.
yeah,
can't assume.
yeah.
Educational library card.
Is the audiobook line the same as e-audiobooks? Because on here, the detail on the library, it's not increased, it's decreased.
Well, I'm sorry, that's just Sandy's budget.
You gotta remember they took
Year
Hoodland
before
out,
it
so you
was
gotta add.
both libraries. Now it's separated to just
Oh, yeah,
Sandy.
that's right.
That makes sense.
So, and we didn't do the detailed budgets added together, I'm sorry.
Oh, I got
You
you.
still have to do some math.
So if I add the 1,500 over from
Yeah.
Hoodland onto that,
Yeah.
then I,
But who's so ours
And
is
that is,
reduced?
we
No,
also
no, it's separate.
changed
You know.
the
Just school.
They broke them
formula.
apart.
We also changed the formula, how we pay for them, and we pay by usage, 100%. We were paying by our population and a percent of usage. So that helped Sandy a little bit.
I just have one more question. Sorry, on the
No, go
detail
ahead.
line. The copier charges, which is at small amounts, like $5,000, but there was nothing in this budget for
It's in the
copier.
contractual services line.
It shows
We're
it's
just
been moved.
consolidating.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect. I didn't see it in Hoodland, so I wanted to know where
Yeah.
the copier meant.
yeah.
Any other questions in the library?
Sandy Library.
Sandy Library. We're gonna do the next one next.
I
Yes,
just
we are.
assumed since we added it together.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Library budget. Page number.
64.
So unfortunately, you can't look at trends for the Hoodland Library, because this is the first year we pulled it out of the Sandy budget. I had a question, you couldn't even pull out class bienniums information. I was like, then we'd have to reduce Sandy's. Yeah, it's very confusing, I know, but it would be a lot of work to go into each budget line and figure out which one was for Hoodland, which one was for Sandy, and
It's first the year.
yes, yeah. So we will see trends going forward. And hopefully, looking at the two budgets separately is more transparent and easier to see what's going on.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Right, so Hoodland Library is starting with about 14% of the carryover balance of Sandy. And that carryover balance, you noticed, was probably large for Sandy. And that is mostly staffing savings. You know, all through the pandemic, we didn't have any, so we always account for substitute help in our budget. That's part of our FTE is substitute help. And we did not have any of that during the pandemic. So almost all of that carryover was really staffing costs that we would have incurred if we had been open to the public all the time. Anytime somebody's out sick or on vacation, we have to backfill, so. Yeah, and then the fees, which you can't see what they were before, but they're a little bit lower than they would have been with that 10-cent fine reduction. We have added, let's see. Getting ahead of myself. The accomplishments and goals. So we're of course working on the strategic plan initiatives at Hoodland as well. And we've made some accomplishments there. And then they are slated, Welch's School is in the Oregon Trail School District. So they would be in the library card for every kid. And we're gonna work on more strategic plan. And then this biennium, we're gonna analyze the collections for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Hoodland.
What's this? I just have to ask. I'm sorry, you may have said,
No,
it.
go
What's the
ahead.
civics challenge?
The Civics Challenge was initiative that we did. We only had, I think, 28 participants, but it was Maureen Hauk, our adult services librarian, set it up. And you, in our electronic source Beanstack, where we do summer reading now, there were challenges, so you could go and watch a city council meeting, or you know, there were all kinds of things. You know, look at volunteer opportunities in the community. There was, Jeff, do you remember? You were super excited about it. There was you.
Jeff is my civics nerds buddy, so.
It's always
I don't remember all the details.
Yeah.
There weren't that many. And it was
Yeah.
an exciting thing. Yeah, we featured it in the newsletter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, you should go and look at it.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna make the.
Yeah. And then at Hoodland, we added an additional 0.125 FTE, so 5 hours a week, so that we could be open an additional morning a week. They were only open one morning a week, and we had lots of requests to be open another morning. So we're gonna open an additional 3 hours on a morning so that people can come in. And then the 15% increase in ebooks and e-audiobooks. And then we need to purchase a few computers at Hoodland. Not nearly as many as at Sandy, but Hoodlands are even more ancient than the ones at Sandy. I think Sandy's staff computers that we're replacing were purchased in 2016. And some of the laptops and the print release stations, they may have been there when I arrived, so but they're old. We need to replace them. So that capital line is much higher in both budgets than it has been in the past.
Does Hoodland have a Friends of the Library? For Hoodland?
They do. And so most of the programming for the Hoodland Library is in the Friends budget. And that's why you see, I think, $1,000 maybe in the programming line for them. And that money is just enough to do the take and makes over the 2 years that we've been doing. And so the Hoodland Friends are really the source of programming for Hoodland. They, and that money shows up in the miscellaneous revenue line for Hoodland, like it used to for Sandy.
That one's not set up as an endowment like Sandy,
No.
correct? So that's the difference of why that's still in Hoodland, but it's been pulled out of Sandy's because it's not the same sort of
It took
funding
time
mechanism.
for the one in Sandy to get to a point where it could be
Right.
an endowment.
Yeah. And Hoodland doesn't, I mean, they're such a small Friends group.
Yeah.
I mean, they raise money through selling books like the Sandy Friends do.
The Sandy Friends are such a gift.
They're wonderful.
I mean,
Both
not
Friends
not only
groups
do
are
they
wonderful.
run one of the best bookstores in Sandy, if you haven't gone to the book nook and checked it out, but they're a great support for the library.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Any other questions?
So just to clarify, so the ebooks and audiobooks are under digital and audiobooks?
Under digital. Audiobooks are the CD, audiobooks on CD.
Okay, all right.
What is represented under the line professional services and what is represented under indirect support costs?
The indirect support costs are the costs that we pay into for the city. So that's all of how the direct
Insurance.
service departments pay in for like human resources and IT and all of those
Oh, I was
departments.
going to
That's-
say, you pay into the
Yeah.
city, then the city pays back
They
to
do,
you.
yeah, we do. We slide money back and forth, but, okay, the professional services. I think it is, we have some things are in contractual services and some things are in professional services. I'll have to look at it closer and get back to you. It could be we have an art, the Clackamas County Arts Alliance does an art exhibit for each library once throughout the year. And so we have, that changes over 4 times. So that could be in professional services. But I have to look at the line really closely.
Well, I know you didn't
figure out.
want me to, but I added the two together.
No, that's cleaning services are in contractual
And
services.
the one is $9,000 for the two, and the other one is $340,000 for the two. That's why I was wondering.
Contractual services are most of those services. They're like our cleaning and our air filter changes and our window washing and our photocopiers and all of those things that make the library beautiful and make us run. The contractual services probably also has the gas fireplace maintenance in it. All of those things that we contract out to another group to do.
You see the high.
Yeah.
That's
You might just kind of touch on the Hoodland Library rent and that whole effort, you and Jordan.
Sure.
So
So
everybody's aware of the status.
the Library Advisory Board requested a meeting with the county supervisor to ask for the county to pay the Hoodland rents until they find them a permanent building. At this point, the Hoodland Library is the only one of the 3 county libraries that is not slated for a permanent building. They are moving forward on the building for Oak Lodge and Gladstone. The county is putting a lot of funding towards those. So Hoodland Library and the members on the Library Advisory Board really felt strongly that we needed to do something. And so we haven't heard back from the county yet about if they will do that. It seemed feasible during the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, there was a commitment in the meeting that it would be doing something. And maybe budget committee member Lee was also a budget committee member of that.
That's what I was gonna throw. out. Who's all here on the county budget? Just, Dan? Dan, we need you.
But we should be including the rent and the insurance for the building and, you know, the cleaning services or whatever, all those costs of that building, not just. the rent.
They're saving by not building a new.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't hear what he said.
right, I mean, those are also.
That you
costs
sit on
we,
the county.
so they're any library,
Yeah.
with their own facilities too, but,
And he wants your help.
we both get away from it, that it was a positive being kind of looking into it. I imagine they're just going through the budget process. And looking into that, you know, like we've recently heard that they were not going to cut services to the, like the courier services. And things like that. So,
Sure, it has nothing to do with the fact that the representation on the county commission and where they live is closer to the Oak Lodge and to the libraries they're building.
That never happens.
No, I'm sure it has nothing to do with that,
Yeah,
but
yes.
I'm gonna ask you that same question again. I just want to make sure you're getting enough money. You said audiobooks, it went from 8,600 to 74 because it was Hood. And they reduced, but yet I found a lower line that says audiobooks dash Hood. And so when I went to the Hoodland Library, audiobooks, if I look at just the Hood River line from last year, it was 3,300, and even at now it's dropped to 1,500. So if I look at both those lines, you're getting less money in audiobooks than you were.
So the
that
the
slide says
audiobooks on
15%.
CD are getting much less usage because
Sure.
people are downloading. So I based our current year's, the proposed biennium budget on what I believe the current year biennium spending will be.
And then
And
this-
so,
Is reference database and digital combined with that 15% ebook?
no, the reference databases are a different thing, and we have gotten rid of most of the reference databases that we used to utilize or that we used to purchase because they weren't utilized.
And then digital?
Digital are the ebooks and e-audiobooks.
So Digital Hood spent 5,600 last year, and it's only budgeted for 1,500 this year. But that slide
Because of that
says-
change in the formula for how we are paying for we're paying it within the county by usage. And Hoodland Library has a much smaller
Smaller
usage.
usage. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
make sure I get you as much money as you
Yep.
can. I saw deficits. I want to make sure you're not short.
Yeah. I would love more money. I would spend it if I had it.
Along those same lines, how many computers are you looking to purchase in this next budget?
For Hoodland, 5. For Sandy, it is 15.
I noticed your reference database for Hoodland costs more than the reference database for Sandy. You have 6,000 for Hoodland and 5,500 for Sandy. I don't know, making sure we had enough to cover for
I'll make a
Sandy.
motion.
as it's
Is that
low.
true?
We end. Some police and parks.
I'll have to look at that.
I'm just making sure you
Yeah.
got, you know, a lot of eyes here. So.
That could have been a typo. We may need to resolve
So I'm
that.
making a motion.
do we have any other questions for the live?
One comment. So I was highly critical 2 years ago, and I just want to say thank you for splitting these things out and creating that transparency, and confirm that what I'm seeing is $100,000 reduction in general fund transfer, where our net from the general fund to the library, discounting the debt service, is only about 100K now. So to me, that is a huge improvement. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
So we're done with the library. I would like to, what budgets do we have left that we're gonna do next week instead of tonight?
So remaining that we had planned tonight, police, parks and recreation, economic development, and development services.
Not
We
gonna
do-
make
We're
it.
gonna do them next.
Well,
week.
hold on, Chair. I understand that we need to get up. We have a lot of staff members that have been sitting all behind
know.
us.
Well,
waiting
and
for
I
us
get
to
that,
there.
but yeah, I was gonna make a motion that we adjourn as well, not because I want to waste anybody's time. I think 3 hours is enough. Two, we cannot get through, we can't get through police or parks in an hour. There is no way.
Well, and
So-
we're gonna have questions. We've had
That's,
questions. to
that's
every
my,
single
that's my,
budget
that's
tonight,
my point.
Which is great. I
So,
love the question.
The last two,
but-
budget topics took over an hour for us to get through, and I want to make sure everybody gets their due time and their questions answered. They've prepared these budgets and presentations. They deserve our full attention.
And they don't need short shrift because we're in a hurry.
And we
So-
can use the May 4th date to.
So that's where I'm sitting right now. I
How
think,
do you guys feel about
I
it?
would agree with that.
How does the staff feel about it though?
and I don't want to waste your guys' time.
Because I don't
either,
wanna
and
waste
I
your time.
apologize for that.
We're gonna be.
We were gonna be here, we're slated to be here each of the nights. even though
Okay.
we're not presenting.
Okay.
In case there's questions that come up later, of course, you can see the reasoning behind it. So for us, it's a-
We're gonna go to that third meeting anyway.
That's fine. I just wanted to be, I just wanted to slow down a little bit.
100%.
Maybe Rochelle can get her.
So Lori's made a motion. Is there a second that we adjourn? How many seconds?
We're not
All those in
adjourning.
favor of
We're
adjourning, postponing till
Adjourning for
next
tonight.
week, adjourn tonight's meeting, reconvene on the 27th. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, see you next week.